No politics here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the No Politic Here podcast. I have no idea what episode it is, but it's at least 20, which is incredible that this has been going on already for that long. Isaac, how are you doing? Well, actually, sorry, I should say I'm joined as always by my co-host, Isaac of the Overzealots channel. Isaac, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, but it's not important because we have a guest today who is actually very interesting, right? As opposed to us two. So, and Chris goes way back with her. I'm yet to fully meet her. We've introduced ourselves. I'm very excited for this episode, but Chris.
Yeah, we're joined today by Athena, or Covey on TikTok. We know each other from TikTok Lives, the wonderful world of TikTok Lives, that is. But yeah, we've got a very interesting episode planned. So Athena, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Kind of nervous, but other than that, I'm good.
Have you ever done a podcast before?
Like back in 2023, it was like a podcast for Palestine, but ever since then, no, not really.
Yeah, it's definitely a better medium than TikTok Live. I'll say that much. You have less people saying the most unhinged things imaginable. And so, yeah, we're going to be talking today about a topic that you are way more knowledgeable than both of us on, which is kind of about the UAE and Sudan and their role in Africa, and also Israel's expanding role in Africa. But speaking of, a wonderful story emerged, which we've already kind of discussed a little bit, but it's worth talking about, which is, as it turns out, the UAE, well, Israel publicized it first, but Benjamin Netanyahu visited the UAE during the Iran war. And Israel has said that this happened, but the UAE is denying it. And as you said earlier, Athena, this is the favorite thing of the UAE, just to lie about everything, right?
100%. Like the UAE is this is just like how their government operates, right? For example, the US State Treasury sanctioned multiple governments, multiple companies within the UAE that were linked to the RSF. They are based in the UAE. They currently still operate in gold smuggling, in sending weapons and armored vehicles, and yet the UAE up until today still denies their involvement in Sudan, right? So the UAE consistently does this. It denies things that are very, very obvious. But also, I think this is a complete disaster for the UAE because Iran could use this as a further justification to engage in any type of military action against the UAE. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were literally hitting the UAE last week. It kind of shows you also the stupidity of the Abraham Accords. Like, genuinely, because most people, I remember a lecturer told me this, but the UAE and Israel have had relationships for actually quite a long time. The Abraham Accords were much more of a formalization of that, based on the expectation that Saudi Arabia would eventually join the Abraham Accords too, which of course has not materialized, and they're not going to. And so it kind of looks like the UAE's a bit out on its own. And I mean, the topic that we're going to be talking about today is perhaps the most insane and depraved aspect of the UAE's foreign policy, right? I mean, some people describe it as fueling the war in Sudan. I feel like you would probably describe it differently to that, as the sole responsible party, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think the UAE is not only fueling the war, it's actively invading Sudan. And I would argue that the RSF currently is an Emirati proxy, basically. So it's not a civil war. It's not this power struggle between two generals. It's actively a war against the Sudanese government by proxy, the RSF.
Yeah, so for people who aren't in the know, the Rapid Support Forces are, in my understanding, they're basically, they were a paramilitary force for the longest time, right? Who have emerged into one of the dominant factions fighting against the Sudanese armed forces, and are fueling. Well, they're fueling the war in Sudan, right? They're responsible for the largest number of atrocities and some of the most grotesque atrocities. I mean, there were reports, I think it was in 2025, that they were literally intentionally destroying Sudanese food sources, in the middle, whilst of like a famine looming at that point. I think that they just started burning food sources, and they're a particularly repugnant organization, correct?
Yes, 100%. So if you look at the current state of Sudan, about 33, like the human cost is disastrous within Sudan. About 33.7 million people currently require urgent humanitarian aid in order to survive, which is the highest number for any single country globally. Approximately 14 million people have been forced from their homes, making Sudan the largest displacement crisis on earth. Around 9.5 to 10 million people are internally displaced people, or IDPs. And about 4.4 or 4.5 million, I think, have fled into like neighboring countries. So countries like Chad, Egypt, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Central African Republic as well. You mentioned the famines. There are multiple declared famines in Sudan, level 5, IPC phase 5. Famine has been already confirmed in El Fasher, which is in Darfur. It has been confirmed in Kadugli, which is in South Kordofan. It has also spread to places like Umbaru and Kernoy as early as 2026. There are also more than 20 additional districts all across Darfur and Kordofan, which are currently on the brink of famine. About 29 million, which is over 60% of the population, I think, are acutely food insecure. And one thing that's also important is when Trump kind of like removed the USAID, which USAID has historically been used as soft power as well. That's true. But in 2025, when he kind of like paused USAID, that shut down about 70 to 80% of community kitchens in Sudan, right? So complete disaster. And there were recent estimates that about 500,000 children have already died since 2023 through starvation alone. So not through direct violence, but indirect violence, right? About 4.2 million children, pregnant nursing women face acute malnutrition as of 2026. It's just a disaster. The official estimates, I think, were about 150,000 deaths, but that is a massive underestimate because about 70% of all healthcare facilities within these conflict zones are completely non-functional, or because they were bombed or they were looted also by the RSF, because they tend to loot healthcare facilities, or they've been actively abandoned. And not to mention the indirect deaths through like lack of clean water, lack of sanitation, I think smallpox. It's a complete disaster. Over 500,000 children have died from starvation and malnutrition related complications since 2023. And so this is the reason as to why the United Nations has labeled it the largest humanitarian crisis in the world currently. And this is being caused by the RSF. And it's being caused by the UAE fueling this and all of its allies as well.
I definitely want to get into more of how the UAE is involved in this and stuff. But would you be interested if we could kind of fill in the audience on a little bit of Sudanese history and how it got to this point? Because in preparation for this episode, I did some researching and I looked into the pre-colonial era and then the colonial era. And the thing that kind of stood out to me was, as far back as I looked in the literature, there were these persistent ethnic tensions that corresponded with class relations. So one of the things that I learned was the North is predominantly Arabized, right? Or adjacent to like Islam or Arab culture. And they would, this was something that I found really interesting, is Arab merchants and stuff like over time would come to Sudan, and they would marry into the societies that were there, and those pre-existing societies passed things down matrilineally, right? Did I say that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Fuck, tricky one, man. And over time, after they were kind of like in those relationships, and I guess reaped the benefits of that, you know, matrilineal succession of goods and whatever, they then changed the system so that things would be passed down patrilineally. Is that, am I onto something here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was how,
I think so, yeah.
and that was how a lot of like the wealth and stuff ended up getting into the hands of like the Arab merchants, and they kind of became like a dominant force in the culture early on through that kind of practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, like, first of all, I think what is incredibly important when you're talking about Sudan is there is this active attempt to make it seem as if it's Arab versus African. And I think that is also a narrative that the UAE is also pushing to make it seem as if, oh, these Arab settlers are coming in here and they're invading and they're taking over African land. And it has become much, much more complex than that, because the Arabs, for example, who are in the RSF, they're not the Arabs from the north. So there's a difference between the Arabs from the north, and there's a difference between the Arab communities that live within the Darfur region. So the Arabs that live within the Darfur region are called the Bagara Arabs. That's like an umbrella term for all the different clans that exist there. A lot of those groups are also nomadic, which means they come from across the Sahel. For example, Hemeti, who is the leader of the RSF, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, he's actually originally from Chad. His family moved there, I think, in the 1970s or 80s to Darfur. So it's and also, even when it comes to the north, it's very important to understand that these are indigenous communities. These are indigenous communities that, from especially roughly the 14th century onward, because of the increasing migration and interaction with the outside, that they adopted Islam, they adopted Arabic as well, they adopted maybe certain Arabic cultures through trade, through migration, through, as you mentioned, intermarriage, through political alliances. And so these are Arabized indigenous populations. And I've noticed that this is a mistake that a lot of people do. They think that people who live in the north are just these settlers that came from elsewhere. And that within itself is kind of like a denial of their heritage. It's kind of like, Palestinians, how like Zionists like to say like, oh, these are Arabs. They come from the Arabian Peninsula,
Yeah. Arabs are Arabian, Jews are from Judea.
Exactly, right?
So it has more to do with like conversion, right? Like the actual indigenous people themselves have not been replaced by like a settler colonial project, but it's more so just conversion to Islam.
Exactly. Yes. So they converted, they adopted Arabic cultures. Like, for example, a lot of the groups within the north, like Shaigi, Jali, and all that stuff, the major ethnic groups in the north, they actually are Nubians. So they're indigenous Nubian people who then got Arabized. They took on Islam. Then they kind of created their own ethnic groups out of that, kind of like merged out of like indigenous Nubian populations, right? So that is one thing that is very, very important. And why it's important. So the RSF historically did start as an Arab supremacist entity, but now it's kind of trying to take on a more Pan-African form. And I don't know if I showed Chris this. Hemeti, when he went to Uganda, he wore this African print clothing. And he had this speech where he was saying, I'm not Arab, I'm African. Actually, the Sudanese government is Arab supremacist. So they use different tactics. When they go to the north, they tell people in the north that they are leftovers of the Ottomans, that they're leftovers of the Arabs, and then they kill them. And then when they go to the western part of Sudan, in the Darfur region, they attack the non-Arabized populations by telling them that they're not Arab. Therefore, they should be exterminated. So this is why it's very important not to make it seem as if it's an African versus Arab thing, because it's much more complex than that.
Right. Because I also noticed that was a distinction that was put onto these groups via colonialism in a lot of these instances. Like, I know during the British rule over, or I guess British authority over, colonial authority over Sudan, they officially separated the north and the south of Sudan. Am I correct on this? And they treated them as two distinct entities, and they underdeveloped the south because they, I guess, perceived the more Arabized regions to be closer to, I guess, what they would consider like civilized or whatever. Like the colonial mindset. Whiteness, right? Proximity to whiteness. And then the south, they would, I guess, they were further in proximity to whiteness, and because of that, they were left in underdeveloped areas. So then when the colonial rule ended, I guess Sudan got their independence in 56, am I right?
56, yes.
And when the British left, those tensions didn't really leave with them. So I see what you're saying. These are largely manufactured, I wouldn't say entirely, but largely exacerbated by colonial influences, these tensions.
Yeah, so it has to do with like the periphery of like North Sudan being always underfunded, neglected, oppressed, and forcibly incorporated into kind of the center, right? So, when we look at South Sudan and how, so you're talking about South Sudan specifically and how the Anglo-Egyptian colonial rule treated it. They had they had these colonial policies called the Southern Policy, where they, as you mentioned, they administered Northern and Southern Sudan very separately. So when it came to Southern Sudan, they sent a lot of missionaries there to kind of Christianize the population. They limited a lot of Arabic instruction. They kind of restricted Northern migration. And they just didn't really invest into the infrastructure. It was very underdeveloped. And then when it came to Northern Sudan, the administration was largely in Arabic, the institutions were largely Islamic, and also the political structures were centered around the Nile and people who lived in the Nile as well. So as you just mentioned, people from the Nuba Mountains, people from South Sudan, people from Darfur, people from Eastern Sudan, for example, were largely neglected. By the way, the interesting thing as to why I say it's not African versus Arab is because in Eastern Sudan, there are populations like the Rashaida who are recent refugees from they are actual refugees from the Arabian Peninsula, and they live in Eastern Sudan. And they themselves were also largely neglected. The past couple of years, they also had a lot of rebellions that were kind of silenced or basically killed off by the Sudanese government. So this is why it's much more complex than Arab versus African and more about the periphery versus the center, and the center being the Arab elites who existed in North Sudan around the Nile River.
Got you. Makes a lot of sense.
I also, obviously, a time when Sudan, because this was a really distinct moment where all of a sudden people showed interest in Sudan for a really short period. And unfortunately, when it's kind of like people on TikTok, you heard narratives that weren't always correct, like that we'll probably get into in a bit, oh, it was just about gold. But when people were showing interest, a lot of the like pro-Israel propagandists realized that what you could do is go, well, the RSF, they're actually Arab supremacists killing black African people. And so that means that this is because all Arabs and Islam is bad. And obviously, I mean, you mentioned this, Isaac, but Mamdani's dad actually wrote about Sudan in one of his books.
That's what I read to prep for this episode. I read part of it.
He also mentions, though, that for half a millennia, Sudan was actually like a uniquely peaceful, space. Like Sudan was obviously not to, there's sometimes this problem of like overstating how, amazing things were pre-coloniality. Of course, there were probably problems. I'm not enough of an expert to diagnose or know every single problem, but, relatively, it was so peaceful in spite of all of these massive, this massive amount of different ethnic groups and what have you.
Yeah, 100%. And also, like, you have to understand, like, over time, because these communities in the center were more invested in than, let's say, communities in the periphery. And when I'm talking about the periphery, I'm talking about areas like, as I mentioned, Darfur, the South, Eastern Sudan, the Nuba Mountains. They received far less investment. And you can see those inequalities as well, even being deeply embedded within the post-colonial state, right, where they weren't really in power as much, hence why there were so many rebellions from these areas, right? But over time, because of this inequality and gap when it comes to investment, some elite cultural hierarchies associated lighter skin, Arabic language, Islamic scholarship, like riverine ancestry with higher social status. So that hierarchy did exist, but it's it's much more, I don't know how to explain this. It's like much more complex than just Arab versus African, because those hierarchies still existed, especially in the Darfur region. When you look at how neglected these Darfur communities were, and historically they used to rule over their lands, they had a lot of autonomy, right? The Fur, the Zaghawa, the Masali, Darfur itself, Dar in Arabic literally means house. So Dar, house of the Fur, right? So each indigenous group within the Darfur region has its own house, and because the Bagara Arab communities in Darfur were kind of given more leverage, more military aid from the central government, they were being weaponized and used against those indigenous communities in Darfur. So when they're talking about indigeneity, it doesn't mean that Northern Sudanese people are not indigenous. What it means is within the context of Darfur, there were indigenous, non-Arabized and sometimes Arabized communities who were having their land encroached upon by nomadic Arabized groups, people who came from across the Sahel region, for example. And those groups were being weaponized against those indigenous communities, right? You had climate change as well. Those Bagara Arabs were more camel herders. They needed more land. The land was getting drier because of climate change. And so they were encroaching more upon the indigenous lands of the Fur, the Zaghawa, the Mesalit, amongst other smaller communities. So I think the case of Sudan is it's so complex, more than 500 ethnic groups. And I think if people actually care about the genocide and care about Sudanese people, they really need to do their due diligence in informing themselves about the situation instead of just being very reckless and spreading this like more Zionist propaganda that ultimately is kind of Islamophobia, in my opinion. Because there was also, you mentioned it, Chris, they were talking about Christians in Sudan are being murdered when like
they do that in Nigeria too.
Yep.
Exactly. And Sudan is like 99.9% Muslim. Like the people who were getting killed in El Fasher were Muslim communities. Actually, like Darfur is actually some of the most religiously Muslim regions in Sudan. So it's just digital warfare, in my opinion.
I was going to say, like, one of the things that I encountered when I was studying, and I found it really interesting, was there were individuals who are African, they are black, but they are Arabized, and they would still, I guess, align closely with the more Arab elite, as you put it. And they would use that proximity to, well, ultimately whiteness, but the closer proximity to the Arab elite to then suppress people who look very similar to them. So it wasn't really about like some sort of like biological phenotypical trait. It was about the perceived relation to the elite class in the region. And you talked about how the Arab community in Darfur was weaponized by the central government. And I don't know if this is a good time to get into how the Janjaweed formed, because I believe that's what you were referring to, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was referring to the Janjaweed and especially the 2003 genocide. Hemeti, who is the leader of the Janjaweed. Do you guys know what Hemeti means in Arabic, by the way?
Protector?
Does it mean protector?
Yeah, exactly. It means protector. Now, the reason as to why Omar Bashir even created the Janjaweed in the first place is because if you look into the history of Sudan, it just has it's a massive history of coups, exactly, right? Yeah. So Omar Bashir...
Sorry to interrupt. Just for the audience who don't know, Omar al-Bashir is the longest leading ruler of Sudan, if I'm correct. It's 30 years intermittently, and it doesn't end until 2019. 2019 is the exact.
When he was toppled.
Yeah. But he's the creator of the Janjaweed, which is,
Exactly. And also you have to understand the Janjaweed were basically created out of remnants of this other group that was in Chad, that was participating in like the Toyota Wars in Chad, like in the wars between Libya and Chad. And this group was called the Arab Gathering. Now this group was created out of remnants of the Islamic Legion, which was another group that was Libyan, if I'm not mistaken. So both of these groups, the creation of them, the funding of them, were supported by Muammar Gaddafi. Now, he supported them because he wanted complete control over the Sahel region. And he supported the creation of these pan-Arab groups that were there to further Libyan interests and Libyan control, and just kind of create a more pan-Arab Sahel region, right? So,
because it's very rich in gold, right? Along the there's like a specific belt in the Sahel that's hugely rich in gold, right? I assume that like him expanding his influence mattered, but there's also an economic incentive, right?
Gold, and also Arabic gum, which I don't really like the name Arabic gum, because Arabic gum doesn't actually come from Arabia, right? So Arabic
was
gum...
it just one company that gave it its name? Like, because I know it's in Rizla paper. It's that's the only place that I know that it's, well, where I've seen it from.
It was just because European merchants like encountered Arabic gum in like Arabian markets. That's the only reason why it's called Arabic gum. But actually, Sudan is the producer of 70 to 80% of global Sahelian gum. I'll just refer to as Sahelian gum or Sudanese gum in this case, because the majority of Sudanese gum comes from Sudan, 70 to 80%, right?
Wow.
So exactly. And it's used in everything. It's used in pharmaceuticals. It's used in makeup. It's like if you drank any carbonated drink today, look at the ingredients. It's probably in the carbonated drink. It's like this thing that grows on trees. It looks very fascinating. I'm not gonna lie.
I've seen it and I've heard of it, but I have no idea like how you use that in products.
My only place I've seen it's in the fat blunts I'm rolling.
Oh my goodness!
I'm joking. That's not. I used to smoke cigarettes, and that's actually the only place I've ever been aware that it's used. It's just in. I just wanted to. I'm just sorry. You can probably hear me googling, because I actually want to see. I have looked at it before. It is very strange looking. It kind of looks like sweets.
Yeah, it's like an emulsifier basically, or like a thickener or a stabilizer that is used in a lot of pharmaceuticals. It's used in like Coca-Cola. It's used in makeup. It's used in a lot of things. It's used in candy. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it prevents it stops crystallization from happening, and that's why it's used in like sugar crystallization, and that's why it's used in candy. But it's just basically used in almost everything. It's all around us, and 80% of that, 70 to 80% of that, comes from Sudan. So next time you drink some type of carbonated drink or soft drink, just know that you have Sudan in your hand.
It's kind of crazy because, I mean, we'll get back to the Janjaweed in a second, but I listened to the Ones and Twos podcast on Sudan, and it was all right. There were some things that I wasn't so sure about, but it definitely got some other things right. But they were talking about how, I think Sudan is 10th in the world for agricultural land. It has 110 million hectares of arable land. I mean, it's just a gigantic country, first of all, but it's incredible kind of what Sudan could be, or and the other interesting thing is that energy is going on in Sudan that people act as, and this was, one of the interesting perspectives. They were talking about development in Sudan and how Sudan is developing, right? But the problem is how those energies are being channeled because of what the UAE is interested in, because of what, Hemedti wants. It's being channeled into a bunch of young men, actually almost all young men, who are really capable at using Chinese advanced warfare, advanced military hardware. Like, there are huge amounts of young men in Sudan right now who are very competent at using drones not to like amazing ends, but it's like the unfortunateness of what has befallen Sudan is also a tragedy. This is not a country, and I think that this is a perspective that when I first started, I remember making a video about this. A lot of people just think a country like Sudan is just destined to be horrible forever and just awful because that's the way that people there are. But it couldn't be further from the case. It actually has all of these. I'm sure you told me about the Arabic gum, but it has all of these amazing things, amazing people, and amazing people who are who are seeking some kind of revolutionary change for a more democratic, a more equal future that is being denied to them, majorly because of a callousness from Western governments who don't want to do anything about what the UAE has been up to in Sudan. And I just feel like that this is always, for all of the focus on kind of the negative things befalling Sudan, there is also just this amazing potential that it has, if that kind of makes sense.
So, I am sitting here in front of you guys, like I'm talking to you guys because of Sudan, by the way. I'll explain to you how. Sudan, the Sudanese people within the Horn of Africa are known to be very hospitable. They have accepted refugees from literally everybody, right? So they accepted Syrian refugees, they accepted Palestinian refugees. I mean, there's a famous like a Palestinian poet on social media, on TikTok. His name is Ahmed Sarsour. He's in Gaza right now. He was actually born and raised in Sudan and then fled Sudan when the genocide started in 2023, and then went to Gaza and encountered a second genocide there towards later on of the later half of 2023. But during the Eritrean genocide for 30 years that lasted between 1961 and 1991, my parents left Eritrea and lived in Sudan for about 3 years. And the one thing my mother always told me about Sudan was, the one thing she always heard was the word tfaddali. Tfaddali means welcome in Arabic. So basically, she was fed by people who didn't even know her name. She was given housing. She was treated very, very well. And they kept a lot of people alive. They kept a lot of Eritreans alive, hundreds of thousands of Eritreans. They kept Ethiopians alive, Syrians alive, Palestinians alive, just people from all, like, it's one of the countries in Africa that has some of the most like refugee populations within Sudan. So not only has it accepted so many refugee populations, it has helped so many different countries. Also, like during the Eritrean genocide, the only two countries that actually helped Eritrea were Sudan and Somalia, even though the rest of the world kind of like turned its like back on Eritrea. So Sudan, and this is what makes it so tragic, that Sudan historically has been there for so many different countries, and now it's kind of largely abandoned. And it was also relatively stable, even though it has had a lot of war in the region. But in the region, compared to other countries, it was a relatively stable country. And to see how it has just been destroyed in the span of a couple of years, practically, is just a very tragic story, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, just, I don't know, looking at it as well and its history within, you're talking about its connections to other countries. Sudan played a big role in the cause of like Palestinian liberation. It's where the 3 no's are issued, right? In Khartoum. Yeah. It's where they're issued. And obviously one of the things that the Emiratis don't like about the SAF is the SAF have more links to Palestine than the RSF, if I'm correct about that. That they kind of have sympathies towards, the Palestinian cause, and obviously the Emiratis hate that. And it's such a, it's just, I don't know, like, it is such this intriguing country that has just been left on its own. And something you mentioned actually there as well, it used to have a really good medical education, like higher education for people in medicine. Its university apparently prior to 2019 was serving about 700,000 students, and specifically specializing, or one of its main specializations was within medicine. And so this has all just been destroyed, and the country is suffering so badly as a result of just, Western nations who, something that particularly annoys me is whenever it's brought up by British politicians, they actually have the audacity to bring it up and say, well, why does no one focus on Sudan? But then they never condemn the UAE. In fact, they hold meetings like, within the days that they're like, I can't believe what's happening in Sudan. And then they're like, hey, here's us with, the foreign minister Abdullah bin Zayed, well, I'm just with him today, or Chelsea, the Chelsea Football Club owner Roman Abramovich being sanctioned and losing the football club, but then the UK allows a guy who doesn't even go to the matches, Manchester City's owner, I think it's Tahnoon bin Zayed, if I remember correctly.
Manchester City, it's Mansour, I think, if I'm not
Mansour
mistaken.
bin Zayed, sorry, yeah, excuse me, Mansour. And he is literally, his relationship with Hemedti is closer and more problematic in terms of the proximity that they hold than Putin's with Abramovich. It's actually crazy, the kind of things that you can get away with, and the things that have gotten away with when it comes to Sudan.
Yeah, so they've been on phone calls. There was a New York Times article on this. I forgot what the name of the article. It was basically, I think it was something along the lines of warlord Mansour bin Zayed or something like that. It was kind of like a whole article on him. And they basically reported how American intelligence reported on Hemedti and Mansour bin Zayed having consistent phone calls throughout this genocide, right? So, and he's also deemed to be the handler of the UAE, by the way. All these deals that are actively being made with Libya, especially with the Haftar government, Khalifa Haftar government, who's the warlord in Libya that is currently controlling eastern Libya. A lot of the dealings with him are done through Mansour bin Zayed. The stuff that was in Yemen, southern Yemen, specifically with the STC, was through Mansour bin Zayed in Chad, in South Sudan, and all of these countries. He has successfully built a network to just continue funding this genocide. It's deprived, right? And also another thing that Mansour bin Zayed did was he opened a hospital in Amjad Ras in Chad. And this hospital was supposedly designed to treat Sudanese refugees. And then later on, they found out that this hospital was actually being used to treat RSF fighters. And it was also being used to give more military aid to the RSF. So this is the kind of, like, he's like a cartoon villain. This is the type of people that you would see in, like, Spider-Man or whatever it is, right? He's so evil, and yet he funds all of these like football clubs in New York and in the UK and everywhere else, and he just plasters Etihad Airways everywhere, and then everybody completes forgetting, come to Dubai, Habibi, everything is cool. It's horrific.
Well, the article you're talking about, I've looked it up because it's a brilliant article. The Sheikh Who Conquered Soccer and Coddles Warlords. And the craziest part is there is a photo, I think it's from 2023. I can't remember exactly when the photo is from, and I cannot quickly find it. But anyway, there's a photo of Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo with Mansour and Ramzan Kadyrov, who is the leader of Chechnya, at a weapons fair. At a weapons fair. It's crazy.
2 weeks before the war started, Hemedti actually spent 2 weeks in the UAE. And then he went back to Sudan and then started the war with his attack in Khartoum and all that stuff. So the UAE is most definitely so deeply embedded within this whole genocide. It's not just fueling it. It's actually like it's a UAE invasion, basically.
Before we get like deeply into that, I kind of want to bring the structure back in so that we don't overwhelm the audience. And maybe we could like talk about the rise and fall of Omar al-Bashir, how that turned into descent into war between the two factions, the SAF and the RSF, and how he kind of, created the RSF, how the Janjaweed turned into that. And then we can talk more about how and why the UAE is involved, what their motives are.
Yeah, so first of all, like, even to kind of give people a brief like background. So even before Sudan's independence in 1956, the South Sudan had already began rebelling. So in 1955, it was called the First War or the Anyanya Rebellion. where South Sudanese soldiers basically rebelled because they feared being dominated by Khartoum elites specifically, because the government was located in Khartoum. They feared having to be culturally assimilated, and there was an unequal development again because of lack of investment in the periphery. And so in 1955, a year prior to Sudan even gaining independence, there were those rebellions, those wars had already started, right? So South Sudan had already rebelled. They fought this very brutal civil war up until 1972. 1972, there was a peace agreement that ended it and gave South Sudan more of a autonomy, basically, right? And because it kind of tried to address the complaints and the grievances that they had, which was, again, the fact that they were excluded from the government, that they weren't they didn't receive any investments or development. There was a kind of like there was a domination by Khartoum, basically.
Right. This was the Ethiopian agreement, the one that was negotiated in Ethiopia or signed?
In
right.
Addis Ababa,
okay.
yeah. Ababa Agreement in 1972.
Right. Okay.
And then in 1983, you had Jafar Nimeri, who, by the way, Nimeri, interesting, a lot of people do not know this. In 1956, after Sudan got independent, Sudan had a different flag, by the way. And that different flag was designed by a Sudanese artist and poet whose name was Maki Sufi. And she designed, and if you find that flag, it's very beautiful. It's blue, yellow, green. And the blue stood for the Nile, represented the Nile River. The yellow represented the desert and the arid regions, and the green symbolized the agriculture and farmland within Sudan. And this flag was supposed to symbolize Sudan's African and Arab identities, but also predominantly geared towards the African identity. And then after Nimeri took over through another coup, by the way, he kind of completely threw out that flag and put in the current flag of Sudan, which uses the pan-Arab colors. If you look at the current Sudanese flag.
I'm not sure how accurate this is, but I think I remember hearing or reading about this. But Nimeri, he partook in the 1972 peace agreement that transpired in Ethiopia, and then he kind of backtracked on it. Was he the one who was
shattered it, yeah.
But he was also involved in facilitating it?
I'm not quite sure if Nimeri was involved in facilitating it. I'm not quite sure. I do know that he completely shattered it in 1983, actually. He completely shattered. He kind of abolished the Southern autonomy, and he kind of wanted to implement again Northern domination, and also very strict Sharia law nationwide. And that kind of triggered more war again. And I think it was John Garang who then kind of, there were different militia groups. They kind of united them under the Sudanese People's Liberation Movement or Army, the SPLM or SPLMA. And they then fought again a 22-year civil war where Garang was very different. So he didn't necessarily want to secede. Instead, he wanted kind of like a very free Sudan, a new Sudan. He wanted a new Sudan that was more decentralized, that didn't centralize around Khartoum. He wanted it to be pluralistic. He wanted it to be very secular, separate from political Islam, basically. Because they felt that was being oppressive towards South Sudan, which was not largely Muslim. And that war lasted for 22 years. It was a complete disaster. Again, Israel was involved in that war too. It funded South Sudan historically. It has always done that.
What were its motives?
Fragmentation. I think if you notice right now as well, so if you look up Vista Maps, you'll see the pattern. If you look up Vista Maps, it's in Arabic, but click the highlighted icon twice. If you go to Vista Maps, click the highlighted icon twice, and you will see the current map of Sudan and which parts the RSF controls and which parts the SAF control. And you can see that the RSF is really predominantly concentrated in Western Sudan. And that's because the same way that South Sudan was fragmented, they want to fragment Sudan currently as well. They even have created their own parallel government. So I think ultimately Israel's plan was fragmentation, and also just the Horn of Africa has historically always been used as a pawn in global politics because of the Red Sea, because of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is that choke point that goes into the Red Sea that is bordered by Eritrea, Yemen, and Djibouti. If you control that, you control the Red Sea, you control the Suez Canal, and then the Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Sea, the Indian Ocean. These are some of the most important economic trade routes globally. And if you control that.
And that's kind of why, as we're going to get into later, that's kind of why Israel is kind of jumping at backing Somaliland, right?
Exactly, 100%, right? So that's why there has been a lot of conflict, a lot of genocides, a lot of war in the Horn of Africa and East Africa as a whole because of a lot of these economic trade routes as well. And as I just mentioned, this whole region has been used as a pawn in global politics, geopolitics as well. But so in 1989, that's where our buddy Omar Bashir shows up, right? He comes in. He works together with this man called Hassan al-Turabi, who was considered to be the intellectual mastermind of Sudan's political Islam. Turabi founded the National Islamic Front in about 1984, 1985. And he was basically kind of like the primary architect of the 1989 military coup that helped install Omar Bashir. Now, the people who were toppled were the Prime Minister Sadiq al-Mahdi, who was kind of like the head of a very fragile coalition government that was trying to, again, seek peace and end the civil war between the North and the South. And the president's name was Mirghani, so Ahmed al-Mirghani, who was kind of like the head of the state in that civilian government. And so Omar Bashir comes in, he seized power within this military coup using the help of Hassan al-Turabi. Basically, Turabi was kind of like the power behind the throne, even all throughout the 1990s, by the way. He heavily influenced Omar Bashir and the decisions that he was making. And he also actively influenced the first vice president, whose name was Ali Osman Taha, and Nafir Ali Nafir, who was also the intelligence chief, who even after Bashir kind of grew a bit threatened by Turabi by 1999, and he kind of sidelined him and sent him to prison, but Turabi's kind of quote unquote disciples, I don't know if I should call them that, but his kind of like quote unquote disciples, they still stayed in power. They still were kind of preserving that brutal security apparatus that Omar Bashir led. And it was like strict military rule. There was security institutions that monitored every aspect of Sudanese life. And Omar Bashir also maintained like he implemented a lot of divide and rule strategies, especially in the Darfur region. So he was horrific. And he was the one who created the Janjaweed in 93.
He oversaw the 2003 genocide in Darfur, right? Am I right about
that? Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So in 1993, what he did was there was a man by the name of Musa Hilal. So Musa Hilal, who was kind of like the paramount chief of a clan of the Rizagat, Arab Confederation of the Rizagat is a clan under the Bagara Arab umbrella term. They are a group of Arabs who live in the Darfur region. And Musa Hilal was basically kind of like the paramount chief of the Muhammad clan, which was part of that Rizagat Arab Confederation. And he was the architect of the Janjaweed. So he was tasked with picking out remnants from the Islamic Legion and the Arab gathering. And he picked up those remnants and he helped basically Omar Bashir kind of create the Janjaweed in 93. And the reason as to why he created the Janjaweed is because Omar Bashir did not trust the Sudanese military. Because the Sudanese military historically has always been used, if they don't like a president or a leader, they coup them. So he didn't want to be couped since he himself was installed through a coup. So he wanted kind of like to keep a separate paramilitary structure as a protective measure against the Sudanese military.
Wasn't it also, didn't a lot of these militias like have control over some kind of important aspect of Sudan, like oil, agriculture, livestock, and interestingly, something we'll get into a little bit later, gold?
Yeah, they came to especially control these areas because of Omar Bashir. Omar Bashir gave them more access, gave them more control. He gave them much more leverage that they actively used against people in Darfur. And he also used them against South Sudanese people. So the people that the RSF was used against were people from the Nuba Mountains, people from Darfur, people from South Sudan. Again, the center versus the periphery that we were talking about before. So they were predominantly used against the periphery and especially against people in Darfur. And that is how they were able to successfully embed themselves within Sudan and come to control a lot of mines, especially in North Darfur, because Omar Bashir was just giving them so much power. Because they were doing a great job, you know, they were causing a lot of havoc. They kept protecting him. And Janjaweed, by the way, itself in Arabic literally just means like jinn on a horse or something like that, like a devil on a horse, because they literally used to ride horsebacks into these towns and villages. And whatever you saw coming out of Al-Fashir in October of 2025 is literally what they were doing. They used to run blood banks. Yeah. They used to genocide people massively. And they were kind of weaponized against anybody who was considered to be his enemy. And what started the Darfur genocide in 2003 basically was that there were two groups, the Sudanese Liberation Army, so the SLA, that was led by Abdel Wahid al-Nur, who's Forawi. He's from the Four ethnic group. And then Mini Minawi, who is Zaghawa. Interestingly, Mini Minawi is currently in the Sudanese government, by the way, because a lot of the rebels who rebelled against the Sudanese government in 2003 are actually a part of the current Sudanese government. So they got kind of integrated into that. But so it started off with the SLA, which rebelled in early 2003, where they were pushing for more of a secular state. They wanted more regional protection. They were underfunded. They were heavily neglected again. And then JEM, which stands for Justice and Equality Movement, that was led by Dr. Khalid Ibrahim, who was Zaghawa. And he was kind of like a former insider, and now he kind of rebelled against the government. And because they rebelled against the government, the Sudanese government decided to arm these Janjaweed militia, which Musa Hilal was brought in again to kind of basically build, like, to recruit more fighters, right? So he came in to recruit more fighters, and then the Sudanese government gave them arms and weapons. And these militias carried out mass atrocities. They were ethnically cleansing a lot of these non-Arabized communities. They were genociding them. About at least 300,000 people were killed. And then the SAF, which is the Sudanese military, accompanied them. So the SAF would kind of use its air force and use more heavier weaponry. And then the RSF would come in and would commit all these atrocities. And there are drawings, I can send it to you, Chris, later, drawings of people who escaped from the Darfur genocide, who survived it, and they kind of drew their experiences. And you could literally see jets, you could see tanks, and then you could see people on horseback. So it was kind of like a joint SAF aiding and abetting the RSF in genociding Sudanese people, the Darfuris, because they had the goal to rebel, basically.
Right. And then I guess that kind of leads us to, it was 2018 where there was the protests against al-Bashir. And that kind of, I guess, led to his eventual overthrow, right?
So prior to that, I wanted to go into how the RSF, the Janjaweed became the RSF in 2013, because they then kind of rebranded to be more kind of more professional, more government worthy, to look like a professional government institute or structure. So they kind of rebranded into becoming the Rapid Support Forces. In 2014, they got officially incorporated into, they were not incorporated into the military. They were never incorporated in the military. What they were incorporated in was the National Intelligence and Security Services. So they kind of then received full state backing and immunity from prosecution, and then became border patrol. And that's where Libya comes in, because the European Union, they launched this thing called the Khartoum process in 2014, 2015, which kind of aimed at stopping asylum seekers from the Horn of Africa from going to Europe. And so the RSF in 2016 became the border control that was then being funded by the European Union. And so they were patrolling the Sudanese and Libyan border, and they're committing war crimes. And instead of actually stopping the human trafficking at the border between Libya and Sudan, they were actively participating against it. They were colluding with the smugglers. They were systematically selling people, Horn Africans, to the Libyan traffickers. Young women and girls were being sold in slave markets, right? So you see here that this RSF, the Janjaweed, which supposedly rebranded and are now being backed and funded and aided by not only Omar Bashir, but by the European Union, are now subjecting other people who are not Sudanese to violence. And around that time, they were also used in Yemen. So the UAE hired RSF fighters and sent them to Yemen in their war against the Houthis. So basically, they became kind of like a transnational mercenary force that was being employed in other countries. During this Libyan civil war in early 2019, I know that RSF troops were sent to Libya to help there. They were sent to Yemen, and they were actively recruiting foreign fighters. So when people say the Sudanese on Sudanese violence or crime, is fundamentally dehumanizing and completely flattens what's actually happening there, because they target recruitment from overexploited communities across the Sahel. So they go to nomadic communities across the Sahel, Arab tribes, especially across the Sahel, and they offer them money. And they tell them, hey, you want to join this mercenary force? We'll give you like $600, $700 a month. And this is so much money for an overexploited person who is living in the middle of nowhere. So of course, these people are going to grab that opportunity that they don't usually receive. And then they get used as this transnational mercenary force, not only by the Omar Bashir government, but also by the UAE, for example.
Because I know they're in Sudan as well. And I guess we'll talk about this shortly as well. But I know that Colombians predominantly. Sudanese people made up the majority of ground forces in Yemen, but so too did Colombians. And now Colombian mercenaries are back in. There are videos of Colombian mercenaries in Sudan, right?
Yeah, exactly. The Colombian mercenaries are actively training RSF fighters. And it was those same Colombian mercenaries, by the way. This is why the UAE is so sick. When Somalia, because Somalia currently is fighting ISIS in Somalia. And the UAE just kind of came in. I mean, there are reports and rumors about ISIS being kind of exported or imported into Somalia by the UAE and stuff like that. But they just swooped in. We're like, hey, we can protect you guys and we can help you by training you and arming you in your fight against ISIS. And so they were using the Colombian mercenaries in Somalia, training like the Somali forces to fight against ISIS. And then those same Colombian mercenaries would then go to Sudan and train the RSF. And in doing that, they successfully had implicated Somalia into the Sudanese genocide, while making Somalia dependent on their training to fight against ISIS. So, but now, I mean, Somalia kicked them out officially because they received like a better trade deal with Saudi Arabia because of this regional war happening between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Yeah. But it just shows you how sinister the UAE is in doing that, in implicating other African countries into the genocide.
Well, because so in my understanding as well, the UAE and Saudi Arabia actually play quite a key role in the fall of Omar al-Bashir, and I may get this wrong because I may confuse it, but I believe. So they were long backers of Omar al-Bashir, the previous dictator of Sudan who ruled for an incredibly long time, as we mentioned earlier, but he had been backed for the longest time by the Saudis. However, he kept winding, and the Emiratis, he kept winding them up because he refused to take a position on things like the the blockade of Qatar, when I may be using the wrong term, but basically when there was the whole effort to isolate Qatar by the other GCC nations, and because Bashir didn't take a position because he had too many political Islamists in his government, which disappointed the Emiratis, they began to cut certain subsidies to the Omar al-Bashir government, which triggered the initial protests. I believe it was they cut fuel subsidies, which then meant Bashir couldn't pay bread subsidies. And so you kind of created the conditions for there to be some kind of overthrow because the Gulf states were kind of done with him. They viewed him as no longer this reliable ally that they'd hoped for. And so, yeah, they've kind of changed and gone for authoritarians now.
Yeah, exactly. So the protests, you are right. The protests started in 2018 because of these subsidies that were cut. So officially there is no clear evidence, right, that like Saudi Arabia or the UAE kind of backed it. But you are right in that they did enable his toppling, because they kind of first of all, his power began to crack. Sudanese people just became very dissatisfied with the high inflation rates, with the high living costs, just the fact that he was a dictator. He was cracking down on Sudanese civil liberties in general. And so the Saudis did start backing, minimizing their financial support as well.
Did it also have to do with the fact that he oversaw the secession of southern Sudan and the loss of about 70% of the country's oil? That's something I read. I guess when the country was, the secession happened and a lot of the oil fields ended up in South Sudan. I heard that kind of, or I read that sparked tensions and people were disillusioned with him over that.
People were just generally very unhappy with Omar Bashir. This man was an active dictator. He used to flog people in public. If you talk to any Sudanese person, it's like, if I'm not mistaken, they weren't even able to say his name in public. They weren't able to actually criticize him. His critics are always disappeared. And he completely cracked down on civil liberties of Sudanese people. And just every aspect of life, right? So it wasn't just necessarily the living costs, but I'm not too sure about the South Sudan aspect. I do know that caused a lot of chaos and impacted the economy of Sudan. But I'm not sure if the Saudis backed away because of that, because even the late 2010s, they still were supporting him heavily. And
no. I meant the population
Sudanese
was upset.
Population. Oh, yeah. They have always
upset
been
because
upset.
they lost a lot of the oil, and that kind of contributed to the subsidies being cut because they now fell below the borderline. That's what I meant.
Yeah, the Sudanese population were just unhappy with the fact that he ran like a military dictatorship-esque type of rulership while they were being impoverished. Like when you look at even like, and this is why I think it's also very important to say that to understand that it was just certain elite groups in Khartoum, because if you look at even other North Sudanese communities, they were also very underdeveloped. Like they were underdeveloped when it came to like healthcare facilities, when it came to education facilities in the north. Like people had to go literally for hours just to reach a hospital. And so a lot of Sudan was just very, very underdeveloped under his rulership because he was choosing to allocate these funds to people who were loyal to him and to other elites who were in Khartoum. So it was very center dominated.
Yeah, it seems like it's basically urban elites who profited quite well. And there was quite a lot of, which always has just led to disaster for the Middle East, North Africa, which is just neoliberalism. He institutes a load of neoliberalism in the 1990s and basically sells off parts of the state to these to like kind of just paramilitaries, basically. And so you kind of have this just kind of awful situation. And then I think something that I actually kind of wanted to make clear about a previous statement, and something that probably should be appreciated. 2019 in Sudan is a revolution. I think probably the only reason that you can probably say, well, the Saudis and the Emiratis maybe wanted it is because they thought, like how they stole democratic, and I'm not saying here the building of Western democracies, because whenever you say this, I had a lot of people who from like the Middle East, when we used to talk about this kind of stuff more, they'd be like, we didn't want democracy. But the truth is people protested for something that was not dictatorship, that was more accountable to the population. So sure, it may not be, the totally failed, illegitimate style of Western imposed democracies, which are basically whoever the West likes getting picked and then ignoring it when anyone else does it. But in the case of 2019 and 2018 in Sudan, this was a real revolutionary moment. This was people, huge hopes for change, and it has really set the scene as well for what's happening in now, and the attempts by people to control the outcome of Sudan. So it is not an accountable democracy of its people. So it is not this potentially revolutionary, game-changing state, but instead remains potentially locked forever in perpetual authoritarianism, who someone who dances the West correct tune.
I think what's very, very important to understand is one of the famous slogans of that protest, the revolution, was "We are all Darfur." So they were very unhappy with what had happened in Darfur in 2003 and just the consistent genocides as well, right? So the protest, you were right, was run by leftists. It was run by women, by human rights activists, by people who were very, very unsatisfied. I actually know two people who were in the Sudanese revolution. Both of them are currently in Egypt. One of them literally almost died. You know, the person I think, Chris, I told you about both of them. So
yes.
Exactly. One of them almost died. He was stabbed. He was shot multiple times. I think there were 3 different articles on Al Jazeera and stuff like that talked about 3 different protesters that had gotten stabbed, shot, tortured, and died. But all those 3 protesters were actually him. So because of the amount of injuries that he got, news outlets thought that it had happened to 3 different people. And another person who was also during the revolution, they also told me that one of the major slogans was "We are all Darfur," because they were unhappy with the fact that the RSF was legitimized as well. That's another important point. So 2 important points is Musa Hilal, who Human Rights Watch referred to as the poster child for the Janjaweed atrocities. This is the man who I told you who kind of picked which militiamen should join the Janjaweed, and he was the one who recruited the people. He was kind of dominating in Darfur. He was considered the poster child for Janjaweed atrocities. This man had been placed under travel bans and asset freezes in about 2006, I think, by the United Nations Security Council because of his direct responsibility in the war crimes in Darfur. But Omar Bashir awarded him for his loyalty, made him the advisor to the president in 2008. And a lot of people were not happy with that. This man, who basically was the architect of the Janjaweed, is now being kind of given this gift of being advisor to the president, right? And what the interesting thing about Musa Hilal is, he is actually Hemeti's cousin, right? So he's Hemeti's exactly. It's like a family affair, okay? This guy is Hemeti's cousin. And Hemeti used to actually be his like protege, so to say. And after Hemeti kind of transitioned from the Janjaweed into the state-sanctioned like rapid support forces, Musa Hilal didn't want to integrate his fighters into the RSF. He said no, because there were multiple Janjaweed militias. He didn't want to integrate his fighters. And then that kind of caused this clash between RSF and Musa Hilal, and he got jailed in like 2017 for 4 years and only was pardoned and left in 2021, right? So this Musa Hilal is also a very interesting character. So the 2 points that a lot of Sudanese people also did not like was, number one, the fact that Musa Hilal was made the special advisor in 2008, and number two, the fact that the Janjaweed, these devils on horseback, were legitimized and now state-sanctioned as the RSF. So this is also what contributed to the revolution.
Because so how it basically so for like the briefest of summaries, it's protests that culminate in a sit-in in Khartoum where Bashir's junior military figures refuse to fire on the protesters, and that's basically the end for Bashir. His government has lost all legitimacy. But unfortunately for the people of Sudan, that's not really where it ends, right? Because almost instantaneously there's a massacre carried out by the RSF of protesters, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because the I think a lot of members of the Sudanese military, well, I mean, some of them did commit war crimes, but I think largely, if I'm not mistaken, they didn't really want to participate in some areas. And for that particular reason, the RSF was yet again weaponized against Sudanese people. And I think in the first sit-in, they killed 120 people, if I'm not mistaken, but in total it was over 1,000. And a majority of that was committed by the RSF.
Yeah, wow.
Exactly.
Interestingly, so right before that happened, Dagalo had been in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE. And the reason that this is quite important for listeners is, I believe, if I'm correct, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, before he seized power in Egypt in 2013, was also visiting these places. Obviously not Egypt, because he was from Egypt. He visited them and then carried out a very brutal massacre in Rabat to seize power. And so it seems that potentially this was Dagalo going to these countries to get approval to do a massacre and to start massacring people so that he could basically crack down on the democratic elements and ensure that Sudan would fall under his never-ending authoritarian military control.
Exactly. And that's where the civilian coalition comes in, by the way, the civilian military sovereignty council that was created after Omar Bashir was toppled. Because it was in 2019, there was this transitionary council that was created. And that's exactly what you just described, because Abdullah Hamdok is his name. Do you know where he is right now? I think we talked about this last time.
Prison or dead?
No, he's in the UAE. Abdullah Hamdok. Yeah, this is the former civilian prime minister of the civilian-led government, right? This was a transitionary government in 2019 that was implemented. Sudanese people wanted democracy. They protested for democracy. They died for democracy. And they were given this illusion that the civilian-led, quote unquote, government was going to be a democratic rulership, but it was not. It was actually, Abdullah Hamdok was very close to the UAE. He was normalizing relations even with Ethiopia. And historically, Sudan and Ethiopia have not really been close, right? They've been kind of like more on like the enemy side, right, with one another. They've been like their relationship has been very antagonistic. And he came in and he started normalizing relations with Ethiopia. He tried to get closer to the UAE. And he basically was kind of like Hemeti in power, right? He was kind of like a puppet leader for Hemeti and for the UAE. And that's precisely why in 2021, he was toppled. Again, there was another coup by the military. And it kind of dissolved the civilian government. It initially arrested Hamdok, but then later on he went to the UAE, and it kind of killed off the transitionary period. And after that, the Sudanese military realized that the RSF had gotten way too strong. Way too strong. It had embedded itself in Sudan when it comes to control over the resources, when it comes to the gold mine control, when it comes to, especially their stronghold was in Darfur, when it comes into just how powerful this paramilitary unit is. How is this a paramilitary that is not
and the
a part
smuggling
of the
networks, right?
The smuggling networks, exactly, right? So what they tried to do was they tried to integrate the RSF into the military in order to neutralize them because they had gained too much power, and at least that they can have this hierarchical command chain that the RSF would be under. And they basically gave the RSF like 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. They said within 2 years, you have to integrate yourself within quickly, and you have to integrate yourself under the direct command of the Sudanese military and Burhan. And Hemeti basically refused to be subordinate, and he demanded 10 years. So he wanted 10 years to integrate his forces. And the reason as to why he wanted 10 years is because he wanted more time to deeply embed himself further within Sudan, and also to expand his network of allies, right? And expand his relations with the UAE as well. And so that is the dispute centered around that. It's centered around the fact that
Burhan is the head of the SAF, right?
Yes. Burhan is the head of the SAF. He's also the current de facto president of Sudan. And he wanted the RSF to integrate immediately. The RSF said no. And they did not want this command hierarchy. They wanted more control over the whole transition process as well. And so the tensions continued rising. And then in I think in April 11, 2023, the RSF kind of deployed massive numbers of heavily armed troops around the northern city of Meroe, its airport, throughout Khartoum. And then the SAF saw this as a threat. They declared that this mobilization was illegal. And then in April 15, just 4 days after, there was heavy gunfire, explosions that rocked Khartoum, I think at 8 a.m. in the morning, 8 or 9 a.m., which is usually, if you pay attention to RSF, like large scale attacks, for some reason, they usually attack always at around that time, 8 a.m., 9 a.m. They did this in the Zemzem camp when they attacked in April of 2025, I think, which the Zemzem camp was a displacement camp in Darfur. It's not too far away from El Fasher, where people even from the 2003 Darfur genocide had been displaced there, and further people had been displaced after this war started. And there was a complete siege on the Zemzem camp for about 2 years or a year prior to the the rebellion, the rebel militias that had formed within the Zamzam camp fighting against the RSF. They kind of lost power in around April of 2025, if I'm not mistaken. And the RSF just attacked them for 3 days, 72 hours, killed over 2,000 people in the span of 3 days, from 8 a.m. in the morning up until 8 a.m. at night. 8 p.m. at night. They just went on a whole killing spree, and they just randomly killed over 2,000 people. And what was more disturbing about this Zamzam camp attack was that a majority of the people there, was about 500,000 people there. A majority of the people there were just women, children, elderly people, and the sick. So these were the most vulnerable of the most vulnerable populations who were in this camp. And the RSF went in there. They also were targeting Dr. Hanadi Dawood, I think is her name, who was a medical professional. And they targeted her and assassinated her there too. So for some reason, they tend to always attack in the morning. And I think it's because they want to catch people by surprise, maybe.
Yeah.
While they're sleeping. But yeah, Hanadi Dawood is her name. Mm-hmm.
That's what Israel did a lot in Gaza. They would, bomb in the middle of the night and shit.
Exactly.
Quickly, because I guess now we're probably going to kind of talk about the UAE's involvement, which we've already done a bit, but we haven't really covered what are they interested in. And then this moves well into a bit about Israel. I'm really quickly going to go run and pee. I'm absolutely bursting. So
Me too.
Do you know what I think the most important part that we forgot to talk about is Salva Kiir's hat? Do you know about this, Isaac?
No.
So Salva Kiir is the leader of South Sudan, and he always, since the 2000s, he has always worn this hat. And the reason he wears it is because George Bush gave it to him, and every time he appears publicly, Google it. He's got this sick ass hat.
No fucking way. Is it the cowboy hat? Bro, he's kind of dripped out. I'm not gonna lie, dude. This guy's pretty cool looking. Holy shit.
He's horrible though. Don't glaze him.
Is he bad?
He's a horrific person. He literally is a horrific person.
I mean, he's got a little bit of aura. I'm not gonna lie, a tiny bit of aura. But I take your word for it.
Yeah. I guess to pull us away from hat discussion and back to the episode. So as I mentioned earlier, right, a lot of people, when they were talking about Sudan, they were like, the UAE does it for gold. And no doubt it is a great source of gold. The UAE is the main recipient, according to Swiss Aid, of smuggled gold. Apparently in 2022 alone, they received 400 tons of gold that was smuggled from Africa. And the reason that gold is so great to smuggle is because you can melt it down and then it becomes really hard to trace wherever it came from. But that's not really why they're involved in Sudan, is it?
Well, I mean, gold is one of the main points. So there are multiple factors why they're involved in Sudan. Gold is one of them. 97% of Sudanese gold goes to the UAE. Now, this is official, 97% of Sudanese gold goes to the UAE. And this doesn't even take into account the gold that is being smuggled through Chad, especially, and through South Sudan as well. But 97 is crazy. The UAE currently is the world's fourth largest, so this is according to data from the World Gold Council for the year 2024. And also the United States Geological Survey as well. And in 2024-2025, in the period between 2024 and 2025, the UAE was the fourth largest gold exporter. It shipped out about $53.41 billion worth of gold during that period. And in 2024, the UAE also ranked as the world's second largest importer of gold, where it brought in about 1,392 tons valued at like $105.4 billion worth of gold. And it doesn't have gold mines. Wow. Where is it getting all this gold from, right?
In how I understand it, the operation of the gold is much more, though. I was thinking that maybe the most analogous thing I could think of is maybe drugs and America's involvement in South America. Because obviously the Americans were making a bit of money and a lot of money, and they did the same in Afghanistan, and certain people were making huge amounts of wealth. However, they were there for political control and what the kind of drug smuggling operations could do. Well, actually, even then it's not really analogous, because they're using this gold, right? They basically, it comes out of Sudan, and the money is spent on advanced military hardware, predominantly from China, artillery, drones, and yeah, really, really advanced military tech that you can get from cheap from China that is imported via the UAE, that is paid for through illegally smuggled gold that is extracted. It's not, so they don't have really, there's not like a major gold mining industry in Sudan really at this point. It's now artisanal mining, so it's like small scale, millions of people, which I assume is incredibly dangerous, but small scale mining operations with there are over 1 million people involved with it at least, but it's not like like an industrial gold mine. It's artisanal, it's led by people, like that's how Hamdan Dagalo Hamedati is so wealthy, right? He's a gold smuggler basically historically.
And the same thing with the Arabic gum, by the way. The Sudanese gum is also usually harvested by normal families and like normal people, right? It's so the artisanal and small scale gold mining that you just mentioned, that accounts for 91.5% of Sudan's total declared gold production. So the overwhelming majority of gold is literally like in the produced through the like the artisanal and small scale gold mining sector. And when we're talking about small scale mining, we're talking about like this average people who are using like small equipment, simple equipment, like picks, shovels, small crushers, and they use simple processing like sluicing, panning, or amalgamation using mercury. And they rely predominantly on mercury amalgamation as well, which basically as a technique requires direct handling of liquid mercury and heating of this amalgam with like a blowtorch to kind of vaporize the mercury, and it leaves behind this raw sponge gold. And this process is incredibly toxic if it's absorbed through open cuts, if you inhale it as well, which is precisely why there have been clinical observations in Darfur, especially northern Darfur, all these gold zones, which are controlled by the RSF. It has revealed like epidemic levels of chronic mercury poisoning among this artisanal workforce. And when I'm talking about mercury poisoning, I mean, everybody knows what mercury poisoning is like there have been neurological tremors that have been exhibited, irreversible kidney damage, reproductive failures, rapid cognitive decline within this region. So again, Sudanese people are not only being genocided rapidly and exterminated through the RSF, but they're also experiencing a slow genocide through health failure, because they're being forced to work on these gold mines. And as I just mentioned, the UAE has around 10 active gold refineries. Some of them, the biggest ones are Emirates Gold and Al Ittihad Gold, but it has multiple other gold refineries. And as I mentioned, 97% of Sudan's gold exports go to the UAE, and when you're talking about the official exports, not the smuggling ones, the official exports to the UAE when it comes to gold, it generated about $1.52 billion in 2024, which made up 48.5% of Sudan's total exports in general. And Sudan received like 0.01% of the official export value. I think around $183,000 were only retained from that $1.52 billion that the UAE kind of was able to retain. And that was, by the way, in 2024, an 18% increase from the previous year. What a coincidence that the export for some reason, or the import for the UAE and the money that they generated increased by 18% when it came to gold in a year after the genocide started. And by the way, the UAE doesn't do this only to Sudan. It imports 31 tons from Uganda, 19 tons from Rwanda, which Rwanda is involved in the Congolese genocide. And so they get their gold also smuggled from Congo, 18 tons from Chad. And Chad is the primary conduit for RSF smuggled gold that originates within Darfur, because Western Sudan borders Chad, basically, and Central African Republic as well. And the UAE also imports 52 tons of gold from Togo, which is roughly $4 billion annually, right? So it's abysmal how there's the sheer scale of this regional smuggling networks that terminate in Dubai, because that's where most of the gold goes to. And the UAE continues benefiting off of this. It continues benefiting off of the gold. It continues benefiting off of the Sudanese gum. It continues benefiting off of the Red Sea. That's also one thing that it really, really wants. And also, before we get to the Red Sea, the agricultural land, because the UAE is very, like, it's literally desert country, right? It's arid, and therefore it imports.
Relies on imports from Iran, right?
From around the world and from Africa too. Like 90% of its food is imported from the outside. It can't grow its own food. So it heavily depends on these outside countries, which is precisely why it uses different agro investment companies. Like Blue Carbon is one of those companies that is led by Sheikh Ahmed Maktoum, I think, of Dubai. So the Maktoum family rules over Dubai. It's consortium, it has another entity called the International Holding Company that also buys up multiple massive agricultural land as well, and it's arable land is what I meant. So it has so much land. I think Blue Carbon alone in 2023 was able to secure land that was the size of the United Kingdom in Liberia, in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, I think, and multiple different countries. So this is what it's actively doing. It's interested in the land, arable land and water. It's interested in gold. It's interested in the Red Sea, especially, and also other exports. Like chromite and silver and copper and zinc and other rare earth elements that it's also dependent on, that are in the Red Sea Hills region in Sudan. And so it basically gets all of these resources, and it also wants to exercise geopolitical control by controlling the Red Sea.
It basically, because it also plays these large games of, I mean, this is what I wrote my dissertation about. Because some people like to say the UAE isn't ideological. You don't understand, like, this is a post-ideological state. No, it's not. The UAE's ideology is authoritarianism. Its ideology is this basic belief in perpetuating authoritarianism anywhere and everywhere it can. It's why it's obsessed with political Islam, because whatever people's feelings are and whatever their criticisms are of political Islam, in many authoritarian states in the Middle East, North Africa, one of the largest forces, and some are more democratic and some are less democratic, is the Muslim Brotherhood. The UAE doesn't hate them because they're extremists, as its propagandists like to say on the internet. It hates them because they have, in places like Egypt, they represented the biggest political current that could instantaneously win an election, and they don't like that kind of stuff. They don't want people choosing for themselves, because if people could choose for themselves, a great example, which is literal proof of this in Sudan, is that the protesters rejected, and they specifically told the Transitionary Council, which was the civilian-led government, they told them, do not take $3 billion from the UAE and Saudi Arabia. They actively protested against receiving the money because they knew that that was coming with strings attached, that it would likely strengthen authoritarianism rather than build democracy. And so the UAE is like this kind of state that is, its ideology is like bland authoritarianism, where you have a brutal ruler who hopes to use, repressive techniques that are more surveillance, that are more cracking down on protest, and also are not averse from mass killing. And so when you kind of look at it, you have this situation of the Emirati government trying to control the future of Sudanese people, trying to control their economies, because this whole, I guess we kind of, you've kind of explained very well what they're interested in. The other major part is this is actually a way bigger nexus of, you've mentioned the carbon credits, but ports as well in the Red Sea you mentioned.
100%. So so one thing I wanted to address before we get to the ports, right? One of the a prominent manifestation of the strategy that the UAE uses is the Abu Hamid agricultural project that is situated in Sudan's River Nile state. And this project was funded by the UAE's International Holding Company and Sudan's Dal Group. And it is basically like an agricultural enclave that spans over about 415,000 acres of land, or 162,000 hectares of land. And this Emirat, and the thing is, they have enough capital, right? When we look at the Nahyan family, which is the family that leads Abu Dhabi, that rules Abu Dhabi, they have like a net worth of like $313 billion last I checked. So they have enough money to be investing in all of these projects and then controlling it. Now with this Abu Hamid project, which again, they use this Emirati capital to secure the sovereign land and water rights within the state that is already fragile as well. And then Sudan was supposed to receive only 35% of the project's earnings. And that's what they do. They did this with Egypt, where they kind of signed this deal called Ras Al Hikma deal, where they basically leased this, they wanted to build this land off of the coast of Alexandria, which was twice the size of Dubai. And they were going to build like these resorts and this, you know what I mean, like mini Dubai basically. And the Egyptian government only retains like 35 to 36% stake in this. And this foreign entity comes in, it invests so much money, and then it completely controls it, right? It controls the land, and it kind of like, how is the government going to oversee anything if it only retains 35% stake within this project, within this development project? And so they basically use this land to grow stuff like rice, like wheat, like this highly water intensive forage crops. And then they kind of get rerouted back to Emirati markets, and they benefit off of this. And then they continue owning stake in the land. They did this with in Djibouti. When we go to the ports, they invested in this terminal. I think it's called a Dorella terminal. And it's also in the, because I told you I was working on this Excel sheet project to kind of list off all the countries the UAE has invested in and is responsible in as well. So what they did was they kind of invested about $100 million in this company called Horizon Djibouti Terminals Limited that controls a port in Djibouti, specifically the Dorella port. It's like an oil liquid storage terminal. And now they have 90% stake. The UAE, a foreign entity, has 90% stake in this terminal at Dorella Port in Djibouti. And so they keep doing this everywhere. They go to different countries. They invest in the ports. They they own stake 33%, 40%, 50%, sometimes 90%. And they also invest heavily not only in ports because they want to kind of exercise more maritime control, but also in food security, in energy security, in political influence. I know that they also invested in Djibouti in 2001, if I'm not mistaken, where they built like 842 units in this suburb called Balbela suburb in Djibouti. And then in 2007, they followed it up with building like about 1,000 to 1,000 units again in that same Balbela suburb. Right. So it was a total of 3,000 units approximately across these two phases. And so they work into like quote unquote poverty reduction, food security, energy security, maritime control, infrastructure, healthcare. And practically what they're doing is they're controlling the lifeline of these countries. They're actively controlling the lifeline of these countries, and they're doing the same thing that Western European empires did leading up to the Berlin Conference in 1884. So a lot of these Western European countries, because they realized in the first and second phase of resistance, they militarily initially could not defeat or conquer a lot of African ethnic groups and nations and regions. So what they instead did was they kind of created these companies, these corporations, the British East India Company, all this stuff. And then they went there and they started controlling the ports. And then after they successfully controlled all the ports, then they moved inland. And so that is practically what the UAE is doing. And the most diabolical thing is one of the first investments from the UAE was like in 1976, only 5 years after it became a country. That's the crazy thing. Only 5 years after it became a country, it invested about $1 million, which is by today's standards, like about $5.5 million into Burundi, the government of Burundi, like this fisheries development project where it provided equipment to about 3,000 artisanal fishermen on Lake Tanganyika, right? So from the beginning, it's as if they had a plan from the creation of the UAE that they're going to embed themselves within African countries. And what we're witnessing today is like all that labor of the 70s, the 80s, the 90s coming to fruition, and the chickens coming home to roost.
Wow.
I mean, I find it's also crazy because one of the things that I find so interesting about all of this is the way that Iran is perceived, right, through the axis of resistance as destabilizing the Middle East is crazy because no one talks about this. Well, people do, but it's only people who are clued up about the Middle East and Africa that they even bother to mention that this is a thing.
It's not
Most
mainstream.
people don't. No, it's not mainstream at all. When you're kind of talking about, this country that is tearing Sudan apart by funding a group that has no local legitimacy, with the basic goal of establishing an authoritarian strongman there, right? That's basically it. They want to rob Sudanese people of any right to define their own future and instead just be like, well, you're going to be ruled by whatever dictator we like forever. And the Americans go along with it, right? They were really happy because Sudan has joined the Abraham Accords. And one of the reasons they did that is because Hemedti was literally like Israel. No, in fact, I'm going to literally look this up. Israel, hold on. Oh, God.
It was pressured into joining because I know that the U.S. said that they would remove them from the
designation.
Terror list, exactly, and also remove certain sanctions. And Sudan was basically starving. Like they were starving. They needed to feed their people. And so they were forced into signing it, but they still haven't implemented it because before they implemented it, the war broke out. But yeah, it's diabolical how this country, by the way, this country is in the list of 7 countries in 5 years, right? So It's one of the 7 countries. General, I don't know if you know about this, Isaac, but General Wesley Clark, who used to work in the Pentagon, in 2007 or 2006, he kind of came out and said that when he went to meet Rumsfeld in 2001, just 11 days after September 11, that he had received a memo, or a couple of weeks, I think, after sometime in 2001 or 2002, that he received a memo that the U.S. government was planning on destroying 7 countries in 5 years. And Sudan is one of those countries. And the last country that is listed after Sudan, by the way, is Iran, right? Mm-hmm. So the countries that
Libya,
were listed,
Iraq.
Libya, Lebanon, Somalia, Iraq, Sudan, Iran, and then Syria, I think. Exactly, Syria. Yeah. Those 7 countries, and all of them were destroyed. Right?
Yeah. Genuinely incredible. That,
it can't. No, I interrupted you. I'm just saying it can't be a coincidence.
Mm-hmm. No, it's genuinely incredible as well that that these people talk so freely about destroying how many millions of people. What? That's got to be like 400-500 million peoples. You're talking about near enough 10% of the population of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Let's just destroy their countries because America said so. And by the way, I wanted to remember what Hamedati said, that quite simply, Sudan needed Israel to achieve prosperity as a justification for signing the Abraham Accords. All of this is crazy because, I don't know, Isaac. This is probably, I don't know, because obviously, this is something that I studied a bit. Like, I'm no expert. I know more specifically about the UAE's role in these countries. Just the UAE's general role. But, surely you must, instantaneously see this and just be like, yeah, it's just literally like a mini America, basically.
Yeah, oh, dude. As Athena was telling us about how they, export their capital to all of these countries, the first thing that was coming to my mind, and Athena and I semi-bonded over this before we pressed play, was just the Leninist conception of imperialism. And it's just a one-for-one with their behavior. I know. I don't know how you could be a leftist and impugn the imperialism that we see coming out of the West, which should be, because it's disgusting, but then not feel the same against the UAE is doing the same thing.
That's
exactly.
It's actually something that I really couldn't stop thinking about. Is that people are too fixated on the notions from the past of the West stealing democracy from people. And of course, that's still true. And the UAE couldn't do this shit, if the West was like, right, no more. Yeah. It's a small... Actually, increasingly, the West is dependent on, countries like this for the world that's growing, what's it called? Hyperscaling, to do with data centers and all of this kind of stuff. But and the capital that the Emiratis have, they've thrown how much at the US. But either way... This state is now like just one of the most important imperial powers that most people don't talk about, or they're just like, yeah, I kind of hate Dubai, but we don't fully reckon with what it's up to. We don't fully reckon about by the way, Athena, do you have time to talk about Israel?
Yes, I can talk about it.
Okay,
I was actually gonna transition into Israel, but before I do that, I wanted to mention something that's very important when it comes to the gold and base metals as well within Sudan. So the physical extraction of gold and base metals requires immense quantities of these specialized chemical precursors like mercury, like elemental mercury, and sodium cyanide. And Sudan does not possess this. So who came to the rescue? The UAE. The UAE is like, hey, I can give you this critical logistical node for the importation of these substances. And it has created the cyclical dependency wherein Sudan cannot extract its wealth without Emirati chemical logistics as well, right? So, and
it's like oil.
Exactly.
It's like oil with the British Empire, where the British... when Mossadegh nationalised oil, it was kind of crazy because in part they didn't have the infrastructure or the know-how because the British had set up the way that that only they could do it, and they educated a certain elite to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And what's so sinister is there is a new trend on Emirati TikTok which I'm going to send you some of the videos, Chris. It is so
Emirati TikTok is
How do you
not a
even-
place I want to be going.
How do you even find that? What do you type in to find that?
Listen,
Where do you
if
get your
you're on,
VPN set?
if you're on TikTok, Isaac, follow me and I can like literally send it to you as well. But
Okay.
so on Emirati TikTok, they have this new trend where it's Emirati gold sellers who are showcasing their gold behind them. And the song they use for that is a Sudanese song. They use a famous Sudanese song where the woman in the song is singing about how, as a Sudanese woman, she requires gold, 600 grams of gold. And she's kind of like, flirtatiously singing about how she needs the gold and needs a ring and all that stuff. And as that is playing, the Sudanese song is playing on the background, these Emiratis are showcasing their gold. And it's so sinister how I don't even know if I can use the word demonic, but it's so incredibly sinister how they sit there and they're basically kind of like rubbing it in the faces of Sudanese people. Look at this. We have your gold. And they're using a Sudanese song. And there was another trend as well where you had Emiratis. There was this one video that I found from Al Ain, which is a city where there's a heavy military base that is also involved in the shipping of military aid to the RSF. And they're in that city playing Sudanese music. It's so diabolical. And then also another thing that they do is they start front companies. So for example, one front company is called Batot Air, like duck air in Arabic, but BATOT Air. And it's registered in Burkina Faso under a Sudanese businessman's name. I did a deep dive into this. And its airplanes are used, cargo planes are used to kind of ship weapons to the RSF. And it's registered in Burkina Faso, but it has never, ever landed. Any plane has never landed in Burkina Faso.
Wow.
And so the plane, they kind of just wanted to go to kind of like register like far away from East Africa. And then I looked into the Sudanese man. He doesn't exist. The Sudanese businessman.
Really?
He does not exist. I literally did such a deep dive into this man. And this man does not exist. And I noticed that a lot of the front companies that are kind of UAE front companies are started by like Yemeni or Sudanese businessmen. And it's kind of like a Jane Doe type of thing. They use like a typical Sudanese or Yemeni name, but then those people don't actually exist, or maybe they do, but they're not necessarily connected to it. And it's very diabolical because what they do is they're trying to, again, say, it's not us. The Sudanese people are the ones who are killing themselves. And that's precisely why they kind of let this like Sudanese people, quote unquote, start these businesses. But
it's like cartoonishly evil. Like because I'll admit, like this is not an area that I'm extremely well versed in. So I was really excited to have you on and like learn from you. And I'm just shocked now. I just can't really believe that this is all real.
Yeah, and then also they armed the Ethiopian government. They sent them drones during the Tigray war. And currently they're the ones.
That's Mengistu, right?
No. Mengistu was the leader from 1975 up until 1991. He got toppled and he was kicked out to Zimbabwe. Some Eritrean and Tigrayan rebels kind of like marched into Addis Ababa as well. Kind of proud about that. But anyways, I digress. Mengistu was a horrific person himself. He received a lot of funding from literally everyone, from Israel, from the Soviet Union, everybody else.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that was probably Castro's big L, was fomenting relationships with him, because he was a pretty bad guy.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but this shows you how Horn of African politics is so layered, because how is it that you have a country like Ethiopia being supported by the Eastern Bloc and also by the US and its allies during the Cold War, where they're all on the same side? Diabolical. But the current prime minister, his name is Abiy Ahmed. This man has about 1 million deaths under his belt since 2018. And he is currently threatening to invade Eritrea because he wants port access. Well, he doesn't want access. He wants ownership. And the entity that is pushing him, because there was a Middle East Eye article about this that was released in the beginning of this year, talking about this network that the UAE has built and how Ethiopia has now become the main hub for military transport. And some Ethiopian government officials were basically saying that UAE is running the show. UAE is telling Ethiopia to be involved in Sudan, and now Ethiopia has whole RSF camps that it has built, and it's helping RSF invade Sudan. Ethiopia, some of the drone strikes that happened a couple of days ago in Khartoum flew out of Ethiopia, and also Ethiopia keeps threatening to invade Eritrea. And annex pieces of the land so it can get the port, Assab port, which interestingly, the UAE was kicked out of Eritrea in 2021 because they had a base in Assab. But then the Eritrean government realized they were kind of shady and kicked them out. And now they're trying to support Ethiopia to invade Eritrea. Like, they're like, the UAE are a bunch of like petty queens at this point, okay?
Yeah.
And so, and it's just diabolical. But I read this article by Haim Tayyip, the guy who I talked to you about, the Israeli man.
Yes. Do you want to introduce him? Because this guy is Isaac. I don't know if you had a chance. Yeah. I mean, this guy is a really interesting figure because, obviously, actually, I want to preface this by one thing quickly, which is, everyone should go look up the photo of Benjamin Netanyahu with his image of the new Middle East and have a quick look at that, of the countries he deems good and evil, because they're basically countries that the UAE is involved in. Like, he deems Sudan to be a good country,
And also the line that is drawn on the new Middle East, because he has like these two maps. On the one side is blessed.
The blessing and the curse. That's what it's called.
Exactly. And then the line on the blessing looks eerily similar to the IMEC corridor, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. So,
right. Remember, Chris, we spoke about that in our first episode?
Yeah. Exactly. So it's very interesting, fascinating. But so Haim Tayyip, this guy is another ultra villain. Okay. This is an Israeli born entrepreneur. Investor. He's a quote unquote philanthropist. I hate this word at this point, especially after reading the Epstein files. And why was everyone involved in the Epstein files a philanthropist? I don't know. Yeah. But so this guy, he founded a think tank, and the think tank was, surprise, surprise, Israel and Africa Affairs. That's the name of the think tank. And he wrote, like, there was an article in the think tank about the UAE and Israel and East Africa. And in that article, they talk about the importance of East Africa, why both of these nations are investing in East Africa. And then one of the lines that they said both of these nations are doing this in order to gain favor from America, which is very interesting because they said American soft power and hard power was decreasing in that region. So they basically were saying that both of these countries were doing it to gain favor from America. And they said that the UAE is a foot in the door for Israel.
Yes.
That's what they said.
It's kind of true, right, that America has somewhat, especially post-Trump, has retreated from Africa in many ways. And now it seems that the Emirates and Israel are going to take over, right? And this billionaire guy's talking about how, what was it you told me that he said, like, every Israeli is going to live in Africa or some nonsense?
No, he was talking about, by 2050, every second child in Africa is going to be in Africa or something. He didn't say it's going to be African. He said it's going to be in Africa. And then he said that Africa wasn't only a market, but it was a growth engine for the global markets. This guy is diabolical, okay? And he has been active in Angola since the early 1980s. He invested in, I think since 1991, he invested in large-scale infrastructure, social development projects when it comes to water, energy, housing, healthcare. You notice a pattern. Again, the lifeline of a country, right? The UAE does this. Israel is doing this as well. And he founded two groups called Mitreli Group and Menomadin Group, which are kind of like this, are like a linked private sector ecosystem. They're these commercial companies that have a quote unquote philanthropic arm. And they kind of finance or operate these large scale development projects all across Africa, especially in Angola. So Mitreli and Menomadin had run a pediatric cardiac care capacity building initiative and other health projects in the Ivory Coast between 2020 and 2023. He co-founded the Libido Corridor in Congo, which I'm going to go a bit deeper into that later on. In Zambia, the Libido Corridor is supposed to also go through Zambia, by the way, because this is like a corridor that is supposed to extract wealth out of Congo and out of Zambia. And so this company is kind of has like about 100 plus national scale projects across Africa. And what it does is the UAE and Israel, they work together. They're really good partners. So the UAE goes in initially, kind of like warms the place up a bit, and then it kind of like is a foot into the country for Israel. In Angola currently, there was a leaked UAE internal report where they were kind of like the intelligence sector was kind of complaining about their dealings with the Israeli intelligence sector. And within that report, I will send it to you. It's so funny. They were complaining about how they were arrogant and they were making demands instead of cooperating. And they were like giving like a list of letters that they received from Netanyahu's office. And they're kind of like complaining about the arrogance and all that stuff. I'll send it to you. It's very funny, but you have to translate it. It's in Arabic.
So I heard, like, in terms of the reason that they're doing this, so they opened an embassy in Zambia for the first time in 50 plus years. Israel. They opened an embassy in Zambia this year. And one of the reasons that Al Jazeera posited was they were like, oh, Israel is really worried now about how at the United Nations it's going to look like it basically has no support now. And so maybe they're kind of just going to go for African countries and to target some smaller ones like Lusaka, Zambia's capital. Zambia is basically in dire economic trouble and has been since kind of early 2020s. They defaulted on foreign debt. And Israel seems to be exploiting that a bit to get a new ally in Africa, a country that kind of needs it, you know?
It's... We're on the brink of a new scramble for Africa. That's how I best can explain it. And I think that the recolonization, I mean, people might say I'm fear-mongering, but based on what I know, what I'm seeing, comparing it to the Berlin Conference and what Western European powers were doing, I do think that we are on the brink of a new scramble for Africa because the tactics that Israel, the UAE are using in Africa are very, very similar to the tactics that were implemented in the 1870s, 1700s. And so when it comes to Angola, for example, both of them wanted to be involved in this Libido corridor that's supposed to go through Libido. They wanted to open a joint military base in Luanda. So the UAE and Israel wanted to open a joint military base. But this is not the first time because I think in Socotra as well, like last year or 2 years ago, they're trying to also have like a joint military base there too. So, and interestingly, surprise, surprise, there is currently a separatist group in Angola that is in the Cabinda province, right? Wow, what a surprise.
I was going to ask... Because you said this guy, Haim Taib, however you say this guy's name, you said he was active in Angola in the 80s. Was he by chance like 90s. Backing like UNITA? Oh, in the 90s?
90s. No. He was active in 1991. That was after.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder what his takes would have been during the Angolan Civil War. He's probably like super pro South Africa. He's like, fuck, I hope they win, man.
What? shocked Pikachu face. I would have never thought. Like, huh? No, but this guy, by the way, this guy is so important. He received the presidential medal from the Angolan president like last year. Like, this is how important this guy is and how deeply he embedded himself in Angola. And not only that, he was also he also lit the torch for Israel's 77th Independence Day, because Israel wanted to kind of reward him by saying that he did such a remarkable job for pushing Israeli interests in the periphery, right? So this guy is incredibly yes, he's a
that
very
wasn't too long ago,
person.
right?
The 77th.
That was like a couple weeks ago.
No, it was 80 this year.
Yeah. My bad.
No.
Wait, yeah, of course. Yeah, sorry,
I think
that's
it
me being
was
stupid.
last year, I think, or before last year. If I'm
Well,
not
Israel
mistaken.
was all we've got to do is some very basic maths here, which is escaping me. But it was Israel's founded 1948. So this year would be 70. That's last year if it's 77.
Yeah,
last year.
Okay.
You were right, Isaac. Whoever said that was right. I'm just being incredibly stupid here.
No.
Good job, Chris. 10 points for Gryffindor.
Don't start calling me Harry Potter.
10 points for Gryffindor.
This is turning into a TikTok live. Random people just spamming, you look like Harry Potter. Or,
Hamas Potter.
What's Harry? No, Hamas Potter in the Chamber of Hostages, I liked. I thought that was very funny. But just calling me Harry Potter generally, I don't have black hair. I swear I don't look like Harry Potter. I just have round glasses. All of this is just like, I don't know, like, because it just seems to me that you're right, that it kind of looks like some sort of reconstitute, because I think the term neo-colonial was moronic at best when it started. Because the term neo-colonial implies colonialism ended. It never ended. But this might actually fit the term neo-colonial in the sense of, well, previously, this is like an advent of a new colonial era of Israel and the UAE partnering together to dominate African countries.
But
Well, I
they're
think
doing it
neocolonialism-
for... Oh, sorry. Continue, Isaac.
Oh, I was gonna say that's more like Kwame Nkrumah's work, right? Like he has a good book on neocolonialism. Sorry, I kind of forgot where I was going with that, but I didn't mean to
I think
interrupt
some
you.
people just problematize the term in terms of it kind of implies an end, that the colonial period ended,
As opposed
not
to like
say that like the word is terrible, but yeah, that this might actually be the first time that a term like neo-colonial is applicable, because it's almost like, but then again, you're just talking about a reinvigoration of already existing and pre-existing practices, you know.
I think the reason that's why I'm saying it's recolonization, because I genuinely think they're going to put boots on the ground. So they're not only...
Oh, shit.
Yeah, like this is just my speculation, because I think they're already doing that in Congo. I don't know if you heard about this, Isaac, but they basically are building these paramilitary units, that's funded by the UAE. Yet again, always at the scene of the crime, and the US. And they're building these paramilitary units that by 2030 or 2028 is supposed to reach about 28,000 people. And they're supposed to guard the Congolese mines. That's their task. So I genuinely think that this is not even neocolonialism anymore. I do think that we're in the first stages of, or recolonization has already started. And I do think that it's going to get worse. And I promise I'm not being emo or pessimistic. This is just what I speculate is happening.
You mentioned this, and I think that this is worth noting on Israeli connections to this. So the Israeli soldier, his name is Nikolai Asherov, the Israeli soldier who ordered the killing, allegedly, of 15 paramedics in Rafah, the one that they covered up, he was dismissed, I believe, and he just went straight to Congo. Like, he was in Congo instantaneously afterwards. This guy who ordered the killing of 15 Palestinian paramedics just went to the Congo. Some fucking war criminal just went to go do mercenary stuff in the Congo for probably incredibly good money. You know, some little soldier of fortune war criminal who just wanders off to this other country to just,
Yeah.
make a bit of money doing more war crimes.
Yeah, 100%. And Eric Prince as well. I do genuinely think that Eric Prince is going to be involved.
He's the Blackwater guy, right?
Exactly. The Blackwater guy, the guy who... Have you read what his former employees said about him?
No.
Hold on. So let me read this out, actually, because this is diabolical. So his former employees sued him basically back in, were a part of a lawsuit back in 2009. And this is what they said. They said, and I'm quoting this, there's a whole Atlantic article, Nation article on this. So it says, the former employee also alleges that Prince views himself as a Christian crusader tasked with eliminating Muslims and the Islamic faith from the globe. And that Prince's companies encouraged and rewarded the destruction of Iraqi life. So this guy has on multiple occasions, like he's basically a Christian nationalist, right? He's a Christian nationalist. He has been accused of saying that he wants to eliminate Islamic faith from the globe. And the problem here is that within like the East African context or within this African context, a lot of people are racialized as Muslims. I am racialized as Muslim, even though I'm not Muslim. I get subject to Islamophobia the same way like Sikhs get racialized as Muslim as well, even though they're not Muslims, right? So this person is actively just waging war on the whole global South under the guise of a Christian crusade. And do you know where he's based right now? He's based...
Congo?
No, he's in the UAE.
Oh.
Come on, Chris, you should know by now. Whenever she asks, do you know where they're based? It's the UAE.
It's the UAE. If I'm not mistaken, he even got like a citizenship or something like that. This guy was embraced because, and he's also Betsy DeVos's brother. You know, the former Minister of Education in the Trump administration, the first term. He's her brother, okay? And yeah, he's Betsy DeVos's brother. So this guy, which infamously, there's a clip of him saying that Africa needs to be recolonized. And he says that we need to go there, boots on the ground. And then the person tells him like, wait, people on the left are going to say that you're being a colonialist. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. I am a colonialist, right?
Christ.
So
Holy shit.
This guy is a cartoon villain, and I think he's going to be involved. But when it comes to Israel and Haim Tayeb, right? Haim Tayeb is co-founded this Libido Corridor project. He co-founded it, actually. And the Libido Corridor was also pushed by Biden. It was supported by Biden, by the way. So people who try to make it seem as if, it's only Republicans who participate in imperialism, that's not true. But so he co-founded the Libido Corridor in 2025 together with Angola's Sovereign Wealth Fund, where he launched like a private sector-led investment vehicle targeted about like $100 billion worth of money to kind of investment to catalyze infrastructure, industrial, agricultural, and social projects along the Libido Corridor. And this corridor, by the way, is supposed to go through Zambia. It's supposed to go through the Democratic Republic of Congo and then go out through Libido in Angola, the port. So it's basically, how like the British used to kind of create railway systems to kind of make extraction of resources easier, to simplify it. And that's basically what they are actively doing. And this guy, like, he has encouraged more Israeli investment into Africa. He has held speeches about it. And one thing that's so interesting, he mentioned that if Saudi Arabia were to join the Abraham Accords, that more African countries would also join the Abraham Accords.
Yeah.
So that's something he said as well.
It's the crazy part about Israel's sort of never-ending desire to colonize the West Bank and to, do the genocide against Palestinians rather than accept this two-state solution. Because it completely flaunts the logic of, how Israel could be building this future with like Saudi Arabia and what have you, but it can't because of how extreme it is, because of the Gaza genocide. I mean, it's obviously part of why Hamas chose to launch October the 7th. It so obviously is that was a major part, that the Palestine issue was falling down the ladder, or falling down, it was less important issue. But like, this situation in which like the Israel finds itself, where it basically blocks, a multitude of different countries joining and supporting it because it's so interested in colonization of more Palestinian land and never allowing even the two-state solution, which, is not something that I'm like going to sit here and support. But instead of allowing that, they're literally just destroying their own, their own possibilities. It's crazy.
There was, speaking of Israel as well, when it comes to like military aid, there was so Human Rights Watch and Border Forensics released a report a couple of years ago. It's called Airborne Complicity. Like, it was about Frontex. So Frontex, which is basically European Coast Guard. And within this report, they were saying that, first of all, the Libyan slave trade as well, which was kind of established and made systematic after the fall of Gaddafi. The Libyan border patrols, both governments as well, whether it is the Tripoli-based government of Libya, whether it is the Haftar-based government in eastern Libya, they receive a lot of funds from the European Union, a lot of money. And not only them, all North African countries in general receive money from the European Union because they're basically used as a buffer zone between like other African countries and the European Union. So they use them to prevent asylum seekers from crossing the Mediterranean Sea by any means necessary. And how
I think
Libya
it was Maloney.
does it.
Maloney outright admitted that. She's like, oh, I don't know if she was talking about Gaddafi, but she was saying that like, yeah, he prevented like the flow of migrants from coming up. I think Gaddafi said that himself.
Same with Turkey. Turkey, like whenever it wants something, it will weaponize the threat of allowing loads of migrants into Europe.
Exactly.
And it'll be like, if you don't do it, we're going to send migrants. It's kind of horrible because,
Yeah, it's crazy.
You're seeing people who are leaving desperate situations just being weaponized as a political pawn.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I think, was it since like 2016, if I'm not mistaken, about 26,000 people had been killed in the Mediterranean Sea. So the Mediterranean Sea is the deadliest asylum seeking route in the world. And so the Tunisia also receives funds. It captures people in Tunisia. It sells them off to the Libyans across the border for as low as $13 per person. So it literally sells people for $13, which is like lesser than like a meal you could get at a restaurant. And it goes up to like $75 to $90 for women specifically because they're sold as sex slaves. And then they get sold into Libya. And then sometimes Libya holds people for ransom, and then it asks people to pay them the ransom, which is sometimes like $7,000, $8,000, depending on what country you're from. And then if you don't pay, the people get sold into slavery. That's actually what happened to my cousin as well, in which he was captured a couple of years ago. And then my family was way too late to pay the ransom. So he was just sold off into slavery and probably died. So this stuff happens a lot in Libya. And once the asylum seekers leave Libya and they cross over into the Mediterranean Sea, Frontex, which is what was found in this report, in this investigation, Frontex, which is European Coast Guard, they use an Israeli Heron drone to capture the exact coordinates of these asylum seekers who are at sea. And they are in WhatsApp groups with this Libyan border patrol and Coast Guard, and they give them the exact coordinates so that those Libyan Coast Guards can go out into the sea and capture the asylum seekers. And so it's interesting that Israel is also involved in this, but then you had the JNS in the beginning of this year that released an article. I kid you not. The article is called "What Would MLK Do? Demand that Arabs Free Their Black Slaves." Okay. And then
Yeah.
in this article, this JNS article that was released in 2026, they talk about how, the Arabs and the Muslimics, they're all enslaving Black Africans, but we
It's one of their
Israelis,
favorite narratives now to
Exactly.
be like Arabs had a slave trade, that they're really racist to black people. And it's just like, so ridiculous when you look at the history of like how, Palestinians sided with revolutionary movements like the FLN, like Nelson Mandela, what Mandela actually said. And now people who are kind of like, well, actually just, Arabs are the most racist people to black people. And it's like, of course there's truth in like, in countries there is racism. Objectively there is.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, you are from the nations that backed apartheid South Africa until it was literally impossible to do so. You know?
And I think that's what's so infuriating, right? Because these things that they talk about are very real issues. There is slavery in a lot of these countries. There is a lot of death. I mean, multiple mass graves get found in Libya all the damn time. In Egypt, in the Sinai, people are being actively enslaved. There was a Human Rights Watch report from 2014 that talked about the Sinai called "I Wanted to Lay Down and Die." So these things are real, but the problem is they're being weaponized, not because Israel actually cares about the victims, but because it's just trying to manufacture consent to continue killing Palestinians. And so that's the issue that I have. And like, and that they don't care because the RSF has been found using Israeli weapons. So if they actually cared about genocide in Africa, it would have cared about stopping these weapons from landing in the hands of the RSF. But then when you look at the Israeli businessmen who are involved, like Benny Steinmetz, who is of the Benny Steinmetz Group Resources. He is heavily involved in mining ventures across South Africa, Angola, Botswana, and Guinea. When you look at Morris Khan, who is an Israeli billionaire, was an Israeli billionaire, who co-founded Amdocs and was like a venture, quote unquote, philanthropist who funded like these medical environmental initiatives in Africa and especially in Ethiopia. When you look at Lviv, who's this major diamond mogul whose company historically held massive stakes in Angola's diamond mines. Dan Gertler is another person who's deeply involved in the Congo. And it's just a whole array of Israeli companies like Netafim, like Mitreli Group. Like, I feel like the Israeli companies just need their own episode, the same way the UAE needs their own episode as well, because it's just so diabolical how they're actively participating in the recolonization. And what I wanted to say was, this is with Western backing. So Marco Rubio went to, and I'd highly recommend both of you guys to watch the full speech. So he went to Europe, to Germany, at the Munich Security Conference in February of this year.
We
had an episode on this,
where he literally talks about, Western dominance. They thought that it was going to end.
It was over.
Exactly. And then he said, the barbaric communists. I was like, woo, 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 communism at it again. And he's like, anti-colonial liberation movements, as if this is a bad thing.
Yeah.
And And then like there was the Trump administration released their national security strategy in November of 2025, where they put Africa on the last page, pretending as if it's not important. But then when you go to the section about Africa, they actively say, "Oh, we want to harness the resources." They use those exact words. And so Israel and the UAE are basically their co-conspirators now, because both of these entities, in my opinion, are Western proxies and kind of like a finger in the arm of Western imperialism within this whole region. And the only difference is they're just tasked with different areas to completely destabilize. Israel is completely destabilizing the Levant and just West Asia as a whole. And UAE is destabilizing Africa, and especially East Africa. And they're doing a phenomenal job. Like, genuinely, they're doing amazing. Not that I support them, but it's just they're doing the job that they were tasked with doing. And so it's just diabolical.
What were you going to say, Isaac?
We're probably going to say the same thing, that the episode is running long, but we enjoy it. And I was
actually going to say the exact thing.
I was going to see if we could just get maybe move on to the point about how Zionists use Sudan to dismiss Gaza. Maybe talk about that for a bit. And then call it.
I think that makes sense as like a bit to close up with. I guess, to kind of like tie all of this together. I guess another link is, where do you think it sits for you as someone who knows a lot about Sudan, a lot about Africa, when people mention this thing of like, oh, well, people don't care about Sudan. What about Sudan? What do you think? Because obviously there's some truth, like there isn't enough interest in Sudan. There's not enough discussion of what's happened, what is happening, and what the future might hold. But then at the same time, these are supporters of atrocities in Gaza and genocide in Gaza, using another genocide to whitewash their image.
It's fundamental dehumanization, in my opinion, because you are using Sudanese people as a talking point, and that is so dehumanizing. I think, as you mentioned, there is selective empathy. There is selective outrage. What's happening in Sudan and Congo, and just generally what's happening to Black bodies is actively being ignored. It's not, people are not, it's not that people are not aware of it. They are aware of it, but they're actively ignoring it because it's happening to Black bodies. And I genuinely think that there's an element of racism that comes into play with regards to people just being used to or normalizing the extermination of Black bodies, and therefore they don't actually care to pay attention. So this is a very real conversation that really needs to be had, especially amongst leftists. Like, I don't really care if a conservative doesn't talk about it. I know that conservatives are probably not gonna care about deconstructing.
Yeah, they're cooking up the worst take imaginable.
Exactly, right? But like, I think especially amongst leftists, this is a conversation that we do need to have. If we do care about leftism, if we do care about liberation, why are we selective with regards to which marginalized community we pay attention to and prioritize? And so this is a legitimate conversation, but the problem that I have is the people who say, what about Sudan, usually don't do shit. Pardon my French, I'm sorry, but they don't do anything for Sudan. They don't fundraise for Sudan. They don't know what's happening in Sudan. I remember I was talking to this like liberal Zionist on a platform who was telling like a bunch of pro-Palestinians like, oh, why don't you talk about Sudan? So I just asked him, who is fighting whom in Sudan? And this guy did not know. He didn't know anything.
That's so funny. Chris, do you remember when we were talking about, I think we were talking about Ethan Klein, when we were talking about how he used Sudan to deflect away from Gaza. And I was like, I just wonder if he could even answer with the three-letter acronyms, without ChatGPT, what the three-letter acronyms of the two main combatant groups are. And that's so funny that you said that.
Yeah, just like, or just like, all of these... I also find like all of these liberal leftists who purport that they're so upset about the left's, picking and choosing what people are upset about. So many of these liberal leftists, they don't give a shit about Sudan. They just like spend their time going, oh, well, everyone's a bit too supportive of resistance and too mean to Israel. And that's the major problem that the left is facing right now, rather than some long-term structural issues. There was outreach, and like the Palestinian cause definitely internationalized itself, like Palestinian groups. Maybe one might say, well, some of that was cynical, that they wanted support at the UN. But, there clearly was actually this, I don't know, there was actually people who, Palestinians really got interested in Mao and things like that, and the Chinese Revolution, because they were successful in what they did. And there were all of these links built between all of these different organizations. But a lot of that seems to have gone away, not amongst Palestinians here. I'm not talking about Palestinians, but generally amongst like, an internationalist left. And I think that what you're saying, Athena, is definitely correct. And I think one might even start to talk about degrees of whiteness, once again, this kind of like proximity to having darker skin and this kind of because mass slaughter of people in Africa is genuinely so normalized.
Yeah.
That people just accept it.
Yeah, exactly. There are multiple studies about this, by the way. It's called the racial empathy gap, where people were kind of like monitored when it came to white skin being pierced and black skin being pierced. And they just had more of a reaction and like more empathy for the white skin being pierced and the black skin being pierced. And this is called the racial empathy gap. Now, this is, of course, not to say that Palestinians or white people who are privileged or whatever, they're being genocided. But it's in comparison to Sudanese people, they are in closer proximity to whiteness, I would say, in a way that would kind of like give them a leg up over Sudanese people who are African, who are black. So they have that double-edged kind of marginalization. Not only are they black, but they're also African. And so, and the people who bring this up, by the way, they do not have any genuine interest in any productive conversation about selective empathy. They don't give a damn.
Not.
All they want to do is they want to weaponize one genocide against another genocide. And that is so fundamentally dehumanizing, because the person in Gaza, that's not their fault that their genocide is being prioritized. Therefore, the Sudanese person who is dying or the Congolese person who is dying is worth more than just being a talking point. And I think that is the issue that I have, is that these people, and most of the times when I ask them these questions, they don't care. These are the same people who were, when El Fasher fell in October of 2025, they were going around saying, Christian Sudanese people are being killed by the Islamics.
Yeah.
These are the same people. It's like, and them even saying that just goes to show that they know nothing about what's happening in Sudan.
Yeah, there's also the fact that I guess October 7th kind of radicalized a lot of people. It was a very mainstream event. And there's also the proximity of like our Western governments directly backing Israel in such a just open, not disclosed way at all. It's just open. It's out there in the open. We call them our greatest ally. We give them money. We run cover for them. So there's also that, which a lot of people who are vocal about the Palestinian plight are especially vocal about their frustration surrounding the fact that their governments are like sucking up to Israel. And when it comes to Sudan, I don't, because our allies and our, proxies and our UAE, whatever, they support what's happening in Sudan as well, but it's not as bare. It's not as out in the open. Like a lot of the stuff you told me today, I didn't know. And I study this region with whenever I have free time, and I still didn't know all of this stuff you were telling me. So the average person, I was going to say the average person, they see Israel committing a genocide and getting all of the cover in the world from the West and, weapons and money and all this. And it's, I guess it's easier to be like, oh, we need to stop that. And when it comes to Sudan, the causes may be a little bit less clear, and that could kind of cause people to not know what to say.
It's an intentional Emirati policy of denying everything, removing itself from it as much as possible, and subtly getting governments to block it. My government has played a really big role in this. We've blocked multiple discussions about both the Labour and the Conservative government have blocked discussions specifically of the Emirati role in Sudan. The UAE uses all these covert military bases. It secretly flew weapons to Sudan disguised as humanitarian aid. It doesn't cover its tracks that well because it's impossible and you can find this stuff, but it makes this effort, whereas Israel is just mass killing people and then posting the most moronic propaganda imaginable. But actually something that they're using to cloak Sudan, by the way, is they actually now say it's the Muslim Brotherhood. They're trying to sell it to European right-wingers, and they constantly say, anyone can check this out, the Amjad Taha guy, who's backed the RSF, by the way, he literally goes, the Muslim Brotherhood in Sudan are destroying everything. He has a very strange voice. I don't know how he's a propagandist, really, or why they picked him. But anyway, he's like, the Muslim Brotherhood are actually the SAF Muslim Brotherhood do all of the atrocities. Muslims are doing everything wrong. Muslim extremists, because he's a good Muslim. And actually the RSF are really nice. It's mental. They're actually trying to weaponize this now to kind of tap into, because the UAE sells all this stuff about the Muslim Brotherhood. Tommy Robinson actually talks about it constantly. He's like, the Muslim Brother. He actually talked about Sudan. Tommy fucking Robinson.
Oh my God.
This chudded out right wing. Like, he has an addiction to some substances which I dare not even mention on this platform. Very evident. He is alleged to. I do not know that 100%. But anyway, he's just like starting to talk about what's going on in southern Yemen. You know, this chudded out racist who's just like, yeah, I hate everyone who's not white in the UK. Is just like, yeah, actually, you know what? What's happening in southern Yemen is really bad because the UAE is getting beaten back. They're like weaponizing this ignorance on Sudan to push the notion that it's the Muslim Brotherhood responsible for everything there. It's actually mental. So if anything, if there's any message as well, learn about Sudan so you can combat this utterly despicable disinformation as well.
Yeah. I like to refer to them as the Erectile Dysfunction League. The AEDL. But yeah, no, like generally, he does not care. But I have a list, by the way. It's in the link tree in my bio, and Isaac, I can send it to you, or Chris can send it over to you. So currently the countries that are involved in Sudan, whether it is through weapons sales, through vehicle sales, through being used as front companies that are registered in these countries, these are the countries that are involved. The UK, Russia, Colombia, UAE, Japan, South Korea, China, Israel, France, UAE, Poland, Estonia, Spain, Canada, South Wales, United Kingdom, UAE again, China again, Kyrgyzstan, Australia, and Burkina Faso with regards to the Batot Air being registered there, and China again. So all these countries are involved. On top of that, Libya currently is invading Sudan as well. It has invaded Sudan the beginning of last year too. So it operates on the northern side of Sudan, on the triangle between Libya, Chad, and Egypt. Central African Republic is sending mercenaries. There are mercenaries being sent from across the Sahel region. Ethiopia is involved. South Sudanese president is involved. And the interesting thing is the South Sudanese president, the guy with the nice cowboy hat that you guys were talking about, this man. The only redeeming factor of this man is that cowboy hat, okay? I'm going to tell you. This man is actively not only sending his troops to participate in the genocide with the RSF, but he's also actively using his government to kill South Sudanese people who are Nuer. So he's Dinka.
Wow. So
he's specifically targeting the Nuer communities in South Sudan in places like Akobo and Nasser. And the images coming out of there are disgusting. I saw images of RSF fighters running over South Sudanese people in those regions. So it's like this whole network of people just dying, and the RSF uses children. Like, if you see the images of the people, their fighters who died, they use like children who are like 13, 14 years old, 12-year-old children. Sometimes they're children from across the Sahel. Sometimes these are children whose families were killed off. So now they force them to participate in their own genocide by giving them so many drugs. I think the drug is called Captagon or something like that.
Yeah, it's called Captagon. It's like a stimulant that was manufactured in Syria.
Exactly. And then they're on TikTok. Chris, these RSF fighters are on TikTok. They film themselves with like...
What was the name of the guy with the...
Abululu.
Yes, him,
Yeah, he's on TikTok live talking about how he lost count after killing over 2,000 people. And so he's just going to start from zero again. So it's like, it's so out in the open, but people are not bothering to like look into it because it's just happening in Africa, you know? It's like, oh, these Africans are just killing each other again. That's what a lot of people think. So, and I don't know, the UAE and Israel are causing havoc. To me, though, in my opinion, the UAE is the number one largest existential threat to the African continent. And it's... Israel is then after that, and Israel is like an existential threat to the Levant region and West Asia. So, and Rwanda too. Rwanda is a disaster as well.
I guess also Israel I learned this recently, that Israel gives the Moroccan government the equipment to suppress the Polisario Front and the Sahrawi, Sahrawi, how do you say that?
Sahrawi
people, Sahrawi people. Which, I mean, yeah, like you have that battle tested surveillance and means to oppress people just being sold off to another oppressive regime.
100%. And then what's happening in Mali right now, the FLA, the FLA and the JNIM, they're backed by the UAE. They're taking huge like swaths of land in northern Mali, and they're a separatist group. They want to create like their own country or state called Azawid, and they're backed by the UAE and the RSF. All these RSF pages are posting them, celebrating them, right? And so ultimately, these liberal Zionists, to bring it back to the point, these liberal Zionists who have dehumanized Africans so much that they only see us as a talking point. They don't give a damn. And it's, in my opinion, it is pure violence to reduce a people who are already being exterminated. They're literally being evaporated. When we look at Al-Fashir, when it fell, a minimum estimate was that over 60,000 people were killed in 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, 60,000 people in one city, right?
Yeah.
And over 100,000 people are missing. They're missing, and nobody is talking about it. Nobody's ringing the alarms that so many, like over 60,000 lives were snuffed in 3 weeks in one city, and everyone's just going about their day without even talking about it. And these people, these liberal Zionists, liberals, people who try to justify or whitewash Zionism or what Israel is doing, they don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
Because there is
don't care.
like Chris said, there is a kernel of truth that it is unacceptable, that it's not really spoken about to the degree that it should be. And like I said, like October 7th was that moment where a lot of people in the West became very concerned with the Palestinian plight. And, I kind of thought that maybe what happened in Al-Fashir would have served a similar role in the Sudanese plight, but it doesn't seem to have galvanized the support in the same way, which is, also is just unacceptable. It's really depressing.
Yeah, it is. And it's just ultimately, I don't know, it's ultimately, kind of racism, So I know there's going to be, there's going to be some viewer who's watching this podcast or listening to it on Spotify or whatever it is, and they're going to say, oh my God, the race card, stop using the race card. But it's like, I don't know what else. Like, there are multiple genocides happening on the African continent. There's full-blown slave trades happening, and people just, they don't only ignore it, they deny it. That's the issue. And
do you remember when the war in Ukraine started? There were literally European news reporters saying, this is happening to Europeans. Like they're just like, they were fully saying, like, guys, you should care more about this. The people being killed are white.
They changed the name of Kievs in the UK to Kievs, as in chicken Kievs.
Oh my goodness.
The food? Yeah, they genuinely did. Some supermarkets changed the name of them. I'm really sorry. I'm going to need to go pretty soon just because I've still got to eat and such. So shall we close up the episode? I mean, I think that we wrapped it up very well there.
Yeah. Athena, thank you so much. It's really nice to be able to meet you. Chris has told me like really great things about you. I was very, very pleased with the conversation. I learned a lot.
Yeah, I think this will end up being like for probably a lot of our viewers, we did an episode on the Tamil genocide with Aaron Anau, and I think that this will probably end up being a very similar episode for a lot of viewers in the sense of it's something that maybe they don't feel confident talking about, that they don't know enough, but this will offer them an ability to maybe, understand a base level of Sudan and inspire them to read more and learn more, you know? And so thank you so much for providing that. And if people want to check you out, they can find you on TikTok, right? Is your main platform?
Yes. TikTok is my main platform. I do have a YouTube, but I don't really upload that much on there. I'm trying to be better. But TikTok is my main platform. And one thing I wanted to urge people is people are literally being exterminated. So actually do your due diligence. And if people actually care about liberation movements, especially of the global south, then educate yourselves about these things. And then also raise awareness, talk about it as much as you can. Boycott the UAE. Boycott Dubai. This Dubai chocolate plague of a country. And then also there are some amazing initiatives like Darfur IDP. It's a really good initiative that is working on the ground that has helped thousands of families already. Darfur IDP is really good. And yeah, thank you for having me. I think I enjoyed this episode.
Special thanks to our top tier patrons who make these episodes possible: Soph Space, Jamo, Riker G, Cedar Down Under, Clara Mayella, Storm Daughter, Megan Ratana, Ashley the Axolotl, and Zani.